You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 8th part of What If Deku Enters Gravity Falls. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of jkawsome on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Followed immediately by the realization that at this point, it really was the only way to stop Cipher. Ford pointed the memory gun at Stan, hand shaking, and fired. The thing was, Stanley had never met Dipper and Mabel. Sure, he'd heard plenty about them from Shermie, and they'd been supposed to stay with him for the summer when they were 12. Except, a month before they were due to visit, he'd been informed that they and their parents, Stan's nephew and his wife, had gotten into a car crash, and none of them had survived. He'd seen their tiny coffins lowered into the ground, and tried not to think about the summer that never would happen, the kids he'd never get to meet. Then, 3 years later, 4 kids from another world had fallen into his kitchen. And suddenly, Stan thought he knew what it might have been like if they'd survived. Suddenly, despite the fact that Shoto, Mina, Ochako, and Izuku were from another world entirely, Stan felt like he had a family again. He'd let them stay in his attic, and they'd wormed their way into his jaded heart. They helped him save his brother. When the world was ending and they thought they were going to die, they spent what could have been their last moments trying to help him and Ford escape. Izuku reminded him of Ford when he was a kid, filled with excitement and wonder towards the world, with a brain few could keep up with and a thirst for knowledge nothing could contain. Ochako had so much spunk, and was always there with a comforting word or a protective fist raised against anyone who would hurt the people she cared about. Mina was constantly smiling, extraordinarily creative, and sometimes reminded him so much of Shermie's depictions of Mabel that it ached. Shoto was usually quiet, but no less caring, and the way he held himself. The few times he mentioned his family, it reminded Stan more than a little of his own issues with his father. They may not have been related, but they were his kids. This was the least he could do for them. I gotta hand it to you, Ford. You really know how to clear your... The door opened, and Cipher stared at him blankly. Stan grinned and gave the bastard the good old finger gun. What? Stan chuckled. Do a pretty good impression of my brother, don't I? Switch clothes, and no one can tell us apart. Welcome to my mind. Surprised you didn't recognize it. Of course, Stan had packed everything he could into this tiny little room. A version of his living room, complete with the pictures he usually hid under his desk. A place where he could feel safe. Not that Cipher would know, of course. What? The deal's off, Cipher snapped, but as he turned around, the door slammed shut behind him, and blue fire curled around the edges. So Sixer had managed to pull off his part of the plan. What the? Oh no. Stan smirked, relaxing in his chair, even as he could feel the flames eating away at parts of him. Oh yeah, you're going down. You're getting erased. Memory gun. Pretty clever, huh? Why, you idiot, Cipher snapped. Don't you realize you're destroying your own mind too? It's not like I was using this space for much anyway. Cipher still hadn't given up hope, trying his own flames on the door, only for them to fizzle out. Stan would bet money that Shoto could do it better. This pathetic little creature was the one who almost drove his brother to madness and encouraged him to build the rift, who possessed and hurt one of his kids, and who caused the apocalypse, hurting everyone else Stan cared about. What a miserable little bastard. Hey, he snapped. Turn around and look at me, you one-eyed demon. Hesitantly, Cipher turned around. You're a real wise guy, but you made one fatal mistake. You messed with my family. You're making a mistake, Cipher insisted. I'll give you anything. Money, fame, riches, infinite power, your own galaxy. Please, no. His form demented, turning into stranger and stranger shapes. What's happening to me? Nov ilrofer adekni same tuino ht follow osetni tilflisted liberal liwidi lanoser pimiat kovniel tal oxa. Stan Lai. Stan pulled his fist back and punched forwards, shattering Cipher into a million pieces. There was a moment where he just breathed. Then he turned back to the cabinet in his mind room, on which there were 2 picture frames, one that Shermie had sent him of Dipper and Mabel. The other, a photo Suze had randomly taken of Stan, the kids, and Waddles in the yard. Stan had never admitted to Suze that he'd kept the photo. Maybe he should have. Still, he picked it up and smiled as the blue flames licked his arms, then the edges of his face. Guess I was good for something after all. The tapestries glowed, and then their friends were freed, falling to the ground. Shoto helped Pacifica up, while Mina grabbed Suze, Izuku lifted up Magucket, and Ochako helped Wendy. The pyramid around them rumbled, slowly lowering towards the ground, crumbling as it did so. The remaining monsters were sucked up into the rift, screaming as they went. They reached the ground as the last of the pyramid dissolved, drifting into the rift. Then the rift closed, sending out a burst of energy as it did so. By the time Shoto adjusted his eyes, everything had changed. Rather than a burned-out hellscape, they were standing in the woods, right by an intact mystery shack, with no machines attached to it. Cipher was there, semi-buried in the ground. Just a stone statue, with nothing else to it. Nothing else left of him. Something in Shoto's chest twinged uncomfortably. And Stan was kneeling down in the ground, looking completely out of it. "Stan?" Mina asked quietly, hopefully. "Stan, do you know us?" Stan blinked, looking at her curiously. "Are you talking to me?" I don't think we've met before. Sorry, kiddo." Mina blinked back tears. Izuku was already crying. "We had to erase his mind to defeat Bill," Ford murmured. "Stan has no idea, but he did it. He saved the world. He saved me." His voice cracked, and he bent down to hug his brother. "You're our hero, Stanley." "Mr. Pines," before Suze could ask, Ochako wiped at her tears and whispered in his ear. He gasped, looking absolutely horrified. He thought of Stan like a father. This is just as bad for him. "Let's get him home," Shoto said, his own eyes feeling watery. The 6 of them led Stan into the shack. Stan looked around, no recognition sparking in his eyes. "Well, this is a nice place you've got here." "You don't remember any of it?" Suze asked. Stan sat down in his favorite chair, while Waddles curled up at his feet. "No, but this chair hugs my butt like it remembers." There was a pause as he realized no one was smiling at the joke. "Hey, what's with the long faces?" "There's gotta be some way he can jog his memory." Izuku hiccuped slightly, before reaching into one of their bags and pulling out the journals. Shoto's eyes widened. "Oh, right, everything's back to normal. The journals are unburnt again." Izuku grabbed the 3rd one and walked over to Stan, opening it to show him the pages. "I wrote down some stuff, see? That's when we dealt with the lake monster, and then went fishing with you. And here, the bottomless pit. We all fell down that together and told stories while we were down there." "Is the Summerween trickster in there?" Mina wondered, as the rest of them walked over to join the 2. "We all ate candy together afterwards. You scared some kids so badly they left all of their candy for us to take." "And what about the dinosaur cave?" Ochako added. "You punched a pterodactyl in the face." "I've got drawings of that," Izuku agreed, flipping the pages. "We didn't get any pictures, since we were running for our lives and didn't have a camera, but I doodled it and wrote about it later." "I'm sorry," Stan said. "I don't remember any of that, or who you are," Waddles squeaked, jumping on him, and he pushed the pig bear off. "Hey, quit it, Waddles. I'm trying to remember my life story." Hope sparked in Shoto's chest. "What did you say?" "I said get Waddles off of me." Ford looked like he could barely believe it. "It's working. Do we have more pages? Any photographs?" "Let's skip to the stuff about me," Suze agreed. "He needs to remember our boss-employee relationship." "Hey, just because I have amnesia, don't go looking to give yourself a raise, Suze," Stan huffed. Ochako jumped up. "I'll get those videos we took, Stan's and some of them." "There are pictures under the desk in the gift shop," Mina added. "I'll get those." "It was kind of overshadowed by everything afterwards, but we set off fireworks on the roof together once," Shoto told Stan. "And Izuku might have something in there about when we played DD&D against a guy from a world of pure math." "I do," Izuku flipped the pages again. Mina and Ochako came back with pictures and videos. Stan looked, "Listen," and started to smile. "You know," Stan mused, "now that I know who I am again and all, there's something that really needs to be done before the summer is over." "Oh?" Ochako looked up from the book she was reading. "What's that?" Stan grinned, looking particularly vicious. "A special road trip. Or rather, a special revenge trip." He pulled out a small map, and Ochako set down her book to look it over, the other three gathering around. "Every year, my tourist trap competitors prank the Mystery Shack. Last year, one of them duct-taped Suze to the ceiling. That was a fun 78 hours, Suze called out from another room. Shoto narrowed his eyes at this new information. "So we're pranking them back then, right?" "You got it." Stan took out a red marker and circled a few of the spots along the main road the map featured. "I figure we saved the whole world, didn't we? What better way to celebrate than messing up a few petty competitors?" Izuku frowned. "What if they try and prank the Mystery Shack back while we're gone?" Stan motioned towards the vending machine. "That's where Sixer comes in. He's monitoring everything here, in case they try anything funny. Turns out he learned some pretty sadistic tricks from whatever dimensions he was in that can be used on unsuspecting would-be prankers." "Sounds like a plan then." Mina put a hand in the air. "Oh, can we invite Candy, Grenda, and Pacifica? They'd probably love to come along." "And Pacifica probably needs an excuse to get away from her parents," went unsaid. They'd all heard the news that the Northwests were selling their mansion. Pacifica had left a short message saying she was okay since then, but Ochako knew she wasn't the only one who was worried. Stan considered this, then nodded. As long as they signed some non-disclosure agreements, then sure, why not? The more the merrier. "Awesome," Mina stood up. "I'll let them know." Ochako smiled, watching her go, as Shoto and Izuku looked over the map, Stan explaining the different tourist traps they would be targeting. After the absolute nightmare that was Weirdmageddon, she couldn't help but cherish a quiet moment like this. It still felt almost unreal, like she'd blink and the sky would be vomiting nightmares again. She knew she wasn't the only one who'd woken up in cold sweat for the past couple nights, thinking they were back in the apocalypse again. But they weren't. They'd defeated Cipher. They were safe. Maybe a road trip outside of Gravity Falls would help her actually believe it. And don't forget bug spray. It's perfect for spraying in the faces of hitchhikers. Any hitchhiker who tries to take a ride in this rusty RV probably deserves Stan spraying them, Pacifica said dryly, as they approached the vehicle, where Suze and Stan were finishing loading everything up. They'd have to be stupid to want to catch a ride in something this suspicious. Unless they're the monster trying to catch an unsuspecting driver off guard, Shoto shot back lightly. Pacifica smirked. Then they'd be signing their own death warrant, considering this crazy group. "You got that right," Stan agreed, coming over. "And speaking of warrants, please sign these non-disclosure agreements." He passed them out to Pacifica, as well as Candy and Grenda, who had arrived with her. "None of your parents are lawyers, right?" "Nope," Candy assured him brightly. "Just teachers." "Not that my parents would care anyway," Pacifica scoffed, signing the agreement. Shoto winced, but followed them inside. The 7 teenagers gathered in the back while Stan took the wheel and Suze took the seat next to him. Soon after, they were off. Candy scooped up some of the travel pamphlets from the table. "You know, I've always had fun reading these. It's like getting a tiny snapshot of whatever these places thought was most important to visitors to know. Aren't they usually just tourist-wise stuff, and not the actual important parts of the place?" Mina wondered. "Sure, but it's still fun anyways." "You bet." Grenda leaned back in her seat. "This whole thing is so cool. Honestly, I've never been in an RV before. It's crazy that we're sitting at a table while on a moving vehicle." "I always wanted to go on a trip in one of these when I was a kid," Izuku admitted, watching the scenery pass them by. "I never imagined the first time I'd get to ride in one was while in another universe's organ, but I guess it's still one childhood dream fulfilled." "Even if the purpose of the trip is to prank people we've never met before?" Shoto asked, amused. Izuku laughed. "Especially then." "Well, you're in luck," Stan called out from the front of the van. "We're coming up on our first one now, and this place is run by the most black-hearted proprietor in all of Oregon." There was a moment of silence where they watched a sign with a sweet-looking old lady on it pass by, advertising the world's biggest yarn ball. Stan seemed to notice their disbelief. Don't let the face fool you. This woman lit my car on fire on 2 non-consecutive occasions. Old people can be vicious, Mina noted, grinning. They slowed to a stop in front of a massive yarn ball and a sweet pastel-colored house behind it, before disembarking. Oh, that is a really big yarn ball. Think we can go inside it? Candy wondered. Without waiting for an answer, she slipped through the strings. The rest of them looked at each other, shrugged, and followed her. Huh. Guess the inside is empty, Pacifica mused, as she passed into the center of the ball. I wonder how she keeps it in the right shape if there's nothing inside. Maybe there's some sort of wire frame. Izuku played with some of the strings, starting to untangle them in order to find an end. This is a tourist trap. Makes sense that it would be fake. Unable to find an ending string, he shrugged and pulled out his dagger, cutting through one of the threads. All right, here we go. They all slipped out of the yarn ball, and Suze watched their back while Izuku tied the string end to the back of the RV. They hurried inside, and Stan hit the gas. Shoto watched through the window as the ball unraveled, leaving behind only the wire frame that Pacifica had guessed might be there. There was a whistling sound, and a massive nail soared towards them, missing Sue's head by an inch. Shoto could almost visualize the comical expression that Suze would have made if it had nailed him, snorted quietly, then frowned to himself at his own black humor. All that terror during Weirdmageddon must have messed up what seems funny. I guess not everything from then could completely fade, even with Stan's memories back. Well, that was a complete success, Stan said cheerfully. On to the next attraction. One upside-down house righted, and a cornfield filled with corn weevils later, and they pulled into a stop for the night at a park with pools shaped like hot springs. While Shoto and Izuku went to get changed into swimsuits, Grenda pulled the rest of the girls into one of the separate pools. Girl talk time, she said cheerfully. You know, in all this time you two have been here, you've never mentioned if there were any cute guys back home you had your eyes on. You just started this because you wanted to gush about Marius, Candy accused, but she was smiling. Grenda shrugged, unrepentant. Hey, we hit it off so well at the party, and he's inviting me to his home back in Austria for a week before school starts. A part of me still can't believe it's happening, you know? Love works in mysterious ways, Mina agreed. Then she nudged Ochako. Although for Ochako, I'm pretty sure it's not someone here in Gravity Falls she has her eye on. You know, someone with fluffy green hair and healing powers. Ochako's eyes widened, and then her cheeks went red. The other girls ooh-ed, and she buried her face in her hands. Don't tell him, okay? She muttered, not bothering to deny it. Of course not, Candy agreed. It's up to you if you want to tell him. But we did see you two dancing at the party. You weren't the only one blushing. Pretty sure he likes you back. Positive he likes you back, Mina agreed. Me too, she admitted quietly. It's just, I don't know, it's a little embarrassing. Nothing to be embarrassed about, Pacifica encouraged, looking amused. Izuku's cute and sweet. I mean, out of the two I'd personally prefer Shoto. Oh, would you now? But Izuku's a great guy, she continued, clearly pretending she didn't hear Mina. I don't see the problem. Ochako sighed. I guess it's just, he's one of my best friends, you know? Even if we both like each other, what if it doesn't work out? What if it makes everything awkward, and then I lose his friendship? Even if it means not getting to date him, I don't want to risk it. Fair enough, Mina agreed. You don't have to tell him. But, I don't know. She thought back a few days. Had it been that long? Had it been so recent? When they were trapped by Cipher and absolutely sure they were all about to die. The world ended, and we're still here. It can't get much worse than that, right? Why not go for something you know you want? Ochako laughed, the blush in her cheeks fading. That's one way of putting it. Hey, whatever you choose, we're with you, Grenda encouraged. You deserve whatever happiness you want. Ochako took a long look over to where Izuku and Shoto were chatting with Suze and Stan, and then turned back to them, beaming. Yeah, I'll think about it. This was supposed to be a simple road trip, Izuku muttered, fiddling with a sky tram as they slowly moved down the mountain, a spider monster the size of their RV scuttling down the wires after them. We're not even in Gravity Falls right now. This stuff isn't supposed to happen out here. Stan shrugged. There's weird stuff all over the world. It's just concentrated in Gravity Falls. Actually, speaking of which, Ford and I were thinking look out. The tram shook as the spider monster slammed down on top of it, bending down to hiss at them. Mina pulled out her grappling hook and fired, breaking the glass and slamming right into the monster's face. Shadow's hands lit up with fire, and it was flung away from their tram, barely managing to grab onto the wires a bit further down from them. Hey, your fire's still working how you want it to? Mina noted idly as the monster started charging towards them once again. Shadow shrugged. Most of the time. It still goes wild about 30% of the time I use it, and I haven't been able to pull off anything to the extent of what I did in Weirdmageddon. Still, he readied his flames again, obviously more comfortable with using them than he was before. I got it. Izuku drew back from the reconfigured machinery he'd been messing with, then pulled the lever. They shot down like a bullet, slamming into the spider monster at high speeds, knocking it far away from them, and descending rapidly towards the ground. As the end of the line became closer, the cyan glow of Ochako's power surrounded the tram, slowing their descent until they came to a neat stop at the bottom, rushing out and back towards the RV. Go, go, go! Stan slammed on the brakes, and off they went. Izuku made his way back to the table and plopped down at the booth, sighing. Well, that one could have gone better. Ochako sat down next to him and nudged him, smiling. Hey, we all did pretty great, and you basically just hotwired a sky tram, which is awesome. Izuku allowed himself an incredulous laugh. Yeah, I guess I did do that. Really, it made sense that not all of their monster problems would suddenly go away now that Cipher was defeated. The world was back to its normal, strange, wonderful weirdness. And despite the momentary fear he'd felt while it was happening, it was really nothing compared to the terror he'd experienced when the bubble's illusion broke, when he killed the fake All Might, when he saw the fake All Might splatter into a bloody mess on the ground because of him, or when they were facing Cipher. Would everything be like this now? Would they live their whole lives in a world where nothing could ever be as scary as that one week when they were 15? Did it matter? They were still here, weren't they? Izuku was leaning up against Ochako in a booth inside a rundown RV, with his best friends, on a road trip through Oregon to prank tourist attractions. The apocalypse was over. They were all alive. He still dreamed he was back in the bubble. That this was all still a trap. It took watching Shadow light his flames up and seeing no illusion shatter around him to remind himself this was real. He still dreamed about killing All Might. They were here and alive, and they'd be fine. There was a shifting noise on the roof later that night. Izuku listened to it for a moment before grabbing his dagger from under his pillow and making his way outside. It wasn't a monster. It was Ochako, sitting on the roof of the RV and looking up at the stars. There was a moment where Izuku just watched her watching the sky, heart fluttering slightly in his chest, before he shook his head and climbed up next to her. Mind if I join you? He asked softly. She turned to him and beamed. Not at all. Izuku smiled back and sat down next to her, swinging his legs over the side of the RV and looking upwards. The park they were staying at was deep enough into the woods that there was barely any light pollution. It seemed like the entire galaxy was visible tonight. Can't sleep? Ochako finally asked him. Izuku nodded. Bad dreams again. He didn't need to elaborate. Ochako knew what he meant. Me too, she admitted. I keep thinking about this one moment in the bubble when we were escaping, and I slammed the fake Ida into the ceiling, and then he just fell to the floor, like a rag doll, and we went through so many other terrible things, so I'm not sure why it's that moment that's sticking with me, but it is. It was the first time we'd seen Ida in months, Izuku said quietly, even if it wasn't really him. He wouldn't trade Mina or Shadow for the world, and he wouldn't want to subject Ida to the things they'd been through. But Ida had been one of his first friends at UA, alongside Ochako, and he missed him. Him and All Might and... Cipher's bubble hurt. Ochako nodded, fingers lacing together with his. She squeezed his hand tightly. We'll see him again. The real him. No matter how long it takes, it'll definitely happen. Right? Izuku agreed. We beat Cipher. We can definitely make it back home. Maybe we can figure out a way to safely keep a portal open between our worlds while we're at it, Ochako added, clearly only half joking. Then we won't have to give up everything we've got here in order to get back everything at home. That would really be the best case scenario. Who knew? Maybe it was possible. If it was, Izuku wanted to figure out how. Then we could introduce everyone here to everyone back home. Although, well, I'm not sure if All Might and Stan would get along well at first. Or Stan and Aizawa, or Stan and anyone. But maybe once we explained they could start getting along. And Ida could join the four of us and Candy and Grenda and Pacifica on adventures. And I can imagine McGucket would make the best support gear ever. And, I'm totally rambling again, sorry. You never have to apologize for rambling, Ochako insisted. It's adorable, and it's you, and I love hearing it. There was a pause as her words sank in for both of them, and Izuku could feel his heart fluttering in his chest once again. Ochako was the first person he'd met at UA, and she was sweet and pretty and kind, and even as the initial feeling of being flustered from talking to a girl faded, he found himself genuinely falling for her. And she called his rambling adorable. The thing that had annoyed everyone his whole life, and she found it adorable. I was talking to the other girls, Ochako began, hesitant, and Izuku startled a little. And Mina mentioned, the world ended, but we're still here, and maybe we should just go for what we want, I guess. What I mean is... She paused, clearly trying to find the right words, and Izuku wasn't sure his mouth would work right even if he wanted to interrupt her. I like you. I mean, romantically. And it was probably pretty obvious, and nothing has to come of it because I love being your friend, and I'd never want to give that up. But I thought you should know. Ochako was looking at him nervously, and Izuku was still so stunned. I'm not still in Cipher's bubble, right? That's too good to be true, right? There was a pause. Izuku noted with absolute mortification that he'd said that out loud, and then Ochako laughed, bright and clear, and one of the best things he'd heard. We're not in his bubble, she promised. We've seen Shadow using his fire, and no illusion being undone, remember? Yeah. Oh God, that was my reaction to your confession. Oh God, I'm so sorry. He forced himself not to bury his head in his hands. I also like you romantically too. And I don't know how that would work either. I've never dated anyone before. So I guess it's just us being friends, but also going on outings dates, as partners and such, maybe? I think that sounds right, Ochako agreed. Their hands were still intertwined. So, we're still friends, we could just also be dating at the same time. And we don't have to choose between being friends and dating and such. That sounds perfect. I think so too, Izuku admitted, feeling slightly on air. Because Ochako's friendship was so important to him, and if admitting his feelings didn't diminish their friendship, just added a new layer to it, you think maybe we should have talked this over earlier? Ochako laughed again. Oh man, probably. We could have just gotten everything out in the open and done this sooner. We're kind of a couple of goobers, aren't we? Izuku found himself laughing along. Yeah, we really are. Ochako continued to hold his hand, and after a moment, leaned up against his shoulder. Izuku leaned back, and they watched the stars together in comfortable silence. The world had ended, and now it was fine. They were alive, and everything seemed new. Oh my gosh, yes. Ochako laughed as Mina drew her and Izuku into a huge hug. Haha, yeah, thanks for giving me the nudge to actually confess. Izuku chuckled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry it took us so long. Shadow shrugged. It's your relationship. It should be taken at your own pace. He was well aware that he wasn't the best at noticing this kind of stuff, but he was happy for them regardless. Yeah, congrats, you too. Pacifica leaned back, smiling, and Candy and Grenda replaced Mina in hugging their friends. There was something almost wistful in their look, but she blinked it away before Shadow could ask. I'd better not hear any thumping from upstairs interrupting my sleep, or I'm kicking you both out, Stan called from the front seat. Izuku and Ochako both went bright red. What? No, it's not like that. Stan. If it is like that, let Mina and I get some noise-canceling headphones first, Shadow requested, and Mina snickered as they both went even redder. Despite the light teasing, the rest of the drive home passed by quickly. Shadow looked out at the trees that were completely green, under a sky that was blue and not red, and tried to ignore the vague feeling of emptiness in his gut. We saved the world. Stan has his memories back, and he and Ford are finally getting along. Cipher's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. Why do I feel so hollow about it? You know, that offer to stay with us at the shack is still open, Ochako told Pacifica as the mystery shack came into view. And Stan is still willing to chase your parents out with a broom if they try and take you away. Damn straight I am. Pacifica smiled. Thanks, really. But it's probably pretty crowded at the shack at this point. I'll be, she trailed off, looking out the window. Is McGucket waiting for us? Shadow looked, and sure enough, McGucket was waiting on the front steps to the shack, while Ford leaned against the doorframe. He waved and ran over to the RV as Stan parked it. The 9 of them disembarked, and Izuku offered McGucket a confused smile. Hey McGucket, is something wrong? Not a thing, McGucket grinned and turned to Pacifica. You haven't taken your stuff from that big house yet, have ya? Pacifica frowned. No, my parents were dragging their feet. Is there a problem with the person who bought it? Nope. In fact, keep your stuff right where it is. The old man looked entirely too smug. Your folks were going on about what a pain it was to sell their ancestral home to some all-hillbilly like me. And I said if they want to keep a family member there, you could just stay. They practically jumped at the chance. What a weird couple. Pacifica's eyes widened, something like hope reflecting in them. You mean, as in I'd stay, but my parents wouldn't, and I wouldn't have to live with them, and they're fine with that? At McGucket's cheerful nod, she let out a shaky breath, looking stunned. Shadow put what he hoped was an encouraging hand on her shoulder, and she sent him a brief smile. You know they're gonna try and convince me into tricking you into selling the house back, right? Are you sure about this? McGucket hummed. That does sound like something they'd do, but I don't think it sounds like something you'd do. I'm absolutely sure, as long as you're fine with most of it being filled with my inventions. You should do it, Grenda encouraged. Take the chance to slide with socks on all those floors and decorate things however you want. You don't have to though, if the house has too many bad memories for you, Shadow added quietly. Pacifica still seemed a bit stunned, but the initial shock was fading, and she managed a smirk. And miss out on all my parents' treasured rooms being turned into storage? No way, I've got to see that. She turned to McGucket. I really want to. Thank you. Of course, McGucket motioned towards Ford, who had walked over to join Stan. And we were talking about a good place to host that we survived the apocalypse party Stan wanted to throw. At this, Stan grinned, delighted. Oh, tell me more. Good morning, Gravity Falls. It's another beautiful day. Of course, every day seems beautiful, now that the apocalypse is over. In other news, the Northwest family has gone broke. After pledging his allegiance to Cipher and then placing all his savings in weirdness bonds, Preston had to sell his family mansion to preserve his family fortune. And none other than local inventor Fiddleford McGucket has bought the home, as after regaining his sanity, has made millions overnight submitting his patents to the US government. Speaking of which, McGucket is currently collaborating with the local heroes, the Pines family, who are celebrating the return of Stan Pine's memories, and the defeat of Bill Cipher, up at McGucket's new mansion. But other than that, I can safely say our beloved Gravity Falls is back to normal. And now, bodacious tea, with sports. It's called Deathball. The party was even livelier than after Pacifica had let the townsfolk in the last time they'd been here. Everyone Nina had met in the past 3 months was here, young and old, running around and helping themselves to all the food and games. Mina smiled as she watched Izuku look over one of McGucket's new inventions with him, Candy laughing with Pacifica, and Grenda introducing Ochako to Marius, who'd decided to visit. Stan and Ford were discussing something intently in the corner. Suze had his phone up and was showing Melody around through the screen, and Mina was pretty sure she saw Wendy playing spin the bottle in the corner with her friends. Gnomes scattered around the room, trying to steal from plates, while the multi-bear seemed to be showing the Manitors some massage techniques, considering the way they were moving their hands. Even Gideon was there, clearly trying to make some friends with people his age. The last time things had felt this peaceful was probably before she went to Yua. Not that there was anything wrong with excitement, but moments like these were ones to treasure. It still doesn't quite feel real. She turned to see Shadow leaning up against the table next to her, frowning slightly. I don't know why, he continued quietly, Everything's perfect, right? I should be happy, but I just... He held up a hand, as though trying to gesture at something he couldn't quite explain. Mina took his free hand and gave it a squeeze. Hey, we all went through a lot, and while Ochako and I could go back to the shack, and Izuku spent most of that time in the bubble, you were on your own for like 4 days. We're not all back to normal. It's all right for you to not be either. Pretty sure this recovery stuff takes time. Yeah. He gave her a small smile. Thanks, I mean it. Any time. There was a moment of comfortable silence before Ford's voice rang through. Kids, could you come over a minute? Mina turned back to Shadow. You ready to go? Yeah. They headed over, Ochako and Izuku meeting them there. Both of the stands were smiling. We've been talking, Ford began. It truly doesn't seem like there's anything in Gravity Falls that can get you guys safely back to your dimension. But Gravity Falls isn't the only weird place in the world, and I've been picking up on anomalies all over the globe that increased in activity after Weirdmageddon. Just because there's nothing in this town doesn't mean there's nothing in the world that can help. Stan was beaming. And we were already talking about sailing around the world anyways. Only fair that you 4 knuckleheads get to join in. See if we can't find any better portals out there. That, Izuku trailed off, looking at the rest of them with wide eyes. Mina could see her own growing excitement echoed in his expression. That sounds amazing. We'd love to. When are we going? Ochako wondered, practically bouncing with excitement. We'd head out in a month, at most, Ford told them. Enough time to get a proper ship with whatever scientific instruments and living comforts we need. Plus, while we're gone, I was thinking of handing the mystery shack over to Suze to take care of, Stan added. He's been working there so long, he knows all the tricks of the trade. He's gonna freak out when you tell him, Shadow added offhandedly. Make sure we're all there to see when you break the news. Ha, someone's finally grown a sense of humor, Stan slapped Shadow's back good-naturedly. You bet, it's gonna be a great announcement. His expression softened, and an even better trip. Honestly, Mina couldn't wait. They were all starting to fall asleep when the question came up. Hey, guys, do you think we're like the best heroes ever? There was a pause as all 3 of them took in Mina's words. Across from Izuku, Shadow blinked. No? Pretty sure that's All Might, Izuku added. Why would we be? Ochako asked. Mina looked up at the ceiling thoughtfully. I don't know, it's just, heroes save civilians and cities, right? A hero saving a major city is a big deal. And we just saved the entire universe. Has there ever been a hero who's done that before? There was a pause as that sunk in. Just a week ago, they'd saved the universe. It was so mind-boggling, Izuku wasn't surprised it hadn't hit him until now. But, wow. The way Cipher was going, it's not hard to imagine that after he'd had his fill with this universe, he would have moved on to others, Shadow said softly. We may have actually saved multiple universes, including our original one. That's as Izuku trailed off. There really was nothing back home that seemed to compare. Fighting some sort of eldritch demon from another dimension, reversing the apocalypse. That stuff only happened in comic books, not real life. But it was real, and they'd done just that. I don't know about the best heroes ever, he eventually said. But I think we're definitely real heroes, not just hero students, even if we don't have licenses or anything. Ochako hummed. That's the crazy part too, isn't it? We saved the world, the universe, maybe multiple universes. But outside of Gravity Falls, no one will know. If we make it home, we'll just be known as those missing hero students. No one would believe us. That doesn't take away what we did though. Shadow's right hand lit up with blue flames, illuminating the room. He seemed to study them. Ranking doesn't mean anything when it comes to true heroism. Even if we're never recognized for it, we'll know what we did. And so will Stan and Ford and the others. I think that's enough. Yeah, maybe it was a little disappointing that their heroics would never be believed back home. But that didn't mean they weren't worth anything. Regardless of what they were called, they'd know that they were already heroes. And in about a month we're going to be traveling the world with Stan and Ford. Izuku smiled. We'll get to uncover all sorts of mysteries and visit amazing places, and maybe find a way home. Or maybe we'll end up saving the world again. Who knows? The mystery crew is going worldwide, Mina laughed. It's gonna be awesome. And we're gonna do it together, just like everything else. Things had changed drastically since they first landed in Stan's kitchen 3.5 months ago. They had changed drastically over those months. The Izuku of Before Gravity Falls, while excited to be a hero, could never have imagined fighting demons, befriending an entire small town, gaining a sort of found family, or dating his best friend. And even with all the trauma, Izuku found he wouldn't change it for the world. And soon a new adventure would begin. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on one's viewpoint, the trip to find a possible way home with the global anomalies would be rendered moot. The next morning, a misty purple portal opened up in the kitchen of the mystery shack, and a bandaged teacher with long dark hair stepped out. The first thing Shouta noticed when he stepped through Kirigiri's portal was the odd location. A western kitchen looking slightly run down, but still clearly functional. There was a fading smell of pancakes the stove had been used this morning. Was this really where his students had landed? If Kirigiri was tricking them somehow, Shouta was going to strangle the bastard. He checked the portal behind him. It was, thankfully, still open, although he doubted it would remain so for more than an hour. He had to be fast. You've got to be kidding me. Shouta spun around to see an older man in the doorway, with gray hair and glasses, wearing a dark suit. He narrowed his eyes at Shouta, then at the portal behind him, which was swirling around the kitchen. "This your place?" Shouta asked carefully, gripping his scarf with one hand. Something was off, and had been since he'd arrived in this kitchen, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "Sure is," the man agreed shortly. "And who the hell are you?" For a moment, he contemplated lying. But if Kirigiri had really dropped his students off in the same place he'd dropped Shouta off, then this man might have interacted with them, and could know where they were now. "Aizawa Shouta," he said. "And you?" The man's eyes widened. "As in the homeroom teacher guy, with the expulsion threat?" He did know Shouta's student, then. "That's me. My students?" "Yeah, they're here." The man shook his head. "After all of that, this is how things work out? What took you so long anyways?" Shouta opened his mouth to reply, but the man was already turning around. "Hey kids, get down here. Your teacher is in the kitchen. Same creepy purple mist portal that you came through." From somewhere else in the house, there was a loud thud. The man turned back to him, before jerking his head towards the portal. "I was told that thing was a villain. How'd you get it to open again?" "We captured the villain. That's why it took us this long to get here. I promise, we came as fast as we could." The man huffed. "Tell that to the kids, not me. They're the ones who got stranded here." "I will," Shouta agreed. He studied the man in front of him. His arms were crossed. He was shifting a little in discomfort, and despite having called for Shouta's students, he still seemed somewhat suspicious. Not that Shouta could blame him. This whole situation was weird as hell. "You still haven't told me your name," he pointed out. There was a small pause. "Stan Pines. I've been looking after these kids since they got here." There was a gruff sort of fondness in his voice, and Shouta took note of it. "If that's the case, then thank you. I hope they didn't cause you too much trouble." Stan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a few familiar shouts echoed from behind him. With a grin, the man stepped aside, and 4 familiar faces barreled into the room. Midoriya, staring wide-eyed at both Shouta and the portal. Ashido, looking at him with something between hope and weariness. There was weariness on all the kids' faces, actually, which was concerning. Uraraka's hair was completely white and far longer than it had any right to be, pulled back in a braid, and there were bandages wrapped around what Shouta could see of Todoroki's arms. "Is he really real?" Midoriya asked quietly, turning to Todoroki. If there weren't any alarm bells about the strangeness of this whole situation before. "He is," Todoroki confirmed. Out of the 4, he seemed least excited to see Shouta, looking at him with narrowed eyes. "Took everyone long enough." Ashido nudged him. "At least he's here now, right? And that means everything went okay, back at the USG." Shouta internally winced, because okay certainly wasn't a good word for that mess. But this wasn't the place or time to discuss that. "I am sorry it took us so long. We had to track down Kirigiri after he escaped. But he's been captured, and we finally got him to open the same portal he used with you for. An understatement. 4 students being kidnapped from the Usta had nearly caused a mass panic, and multiple top 10 heroes had joined in the search before they'd finally tracked Kirigiri down. Although his location had been deserted of Shigaraki or any of the other villains who'd escaped the attack, which led Shouta to suspected that they'd been seen coming. And of course, there was the fact that Kirigiri had insisted that he had no idea where he'd sent the 4 missing students until suddenly he'd opened the portal back up to their location. It was strange, to say the least. It took you 3.5 months to track down Kirigiri? Uraraka asked, which? What? It's been 3.5 days since the Usta, Shouta said slowly. All 4 students went wide-eyed. Maybe we should sit down and talk this out, Stan suggested. So, another universe. I know it's hard to believe, Ford offered. I can't use my quirk. You showed me the different date, and how no glowing baby showed up in this world. Aizawa paused, looking out the window and nearly doing a double take as a couple of gnomes scampered across the lawn. I can believe it. And you said it's been 3.5 months? Aizawa seemed to take in his surroundings again, as if he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. Not that Izuku could blame him. Yeah, but it's really been 3 days. That's, wow. I can't believe it. Why didn't we ever consider that time might flow differently between universes? Izuku flopped back in his chair, feeling somewhat overwhelmed. 3 days. It had been 3 days. It's happened in some universes, but it's uncommon enough that I didn't suspect it would be in effect between our 2, Ford admitted. I'm sorry, I should have considered every possibility. It's not your fault, Shouto insisted. Yeah, if it's that uncommon, then it makes sense that you wouldn't think of it, Mina agreed. But then we really haven't missed 3 months. We'll get back home and everything's just going to be right where we left it. It sounded insane. Even knowing about the time difference, Izuku couldn't imagine it. It felt almost wrong, somehow. After everything they'd been through, all the ways they'd changed and grown, they could go back to a world that was just the way they left it. That was supposed to be a good thing, right? They didn't miss any school. Mom was probably worried out of her mind, but at least she'd only had to spend a few days worrying instead of a few months. And All Might too, Izuku hadn't let him down by getting trapped in another world for so long. So why did it feel so weird? Not everything, Aizawa admitted. Obviously classes have been suspended until we could get you 4 home, and so some of your classmates could recover from their injuries. The sports festival is being pushed back a couple of weeks, while we tighten security. We won't be having a repeat of this incident. No kidding. Looks pretty bad for a hero school to get attacked by villains like that, I'd imagine. Aizawa, unused to Stan's flippant remarks like the rest of them were, turned to glare at him, and Izuku couldn't help but chuckle. Ochako frowned. So, what? This is it? We're going home? Just like that? As soon as you're ready, Aizawa confirmed. Time might be different here, but I don't want to risk more than an hour, in case another person crossing over alters the time difference. It is a possibility, Ford admitted reluctantly, although he looked as happy about the thought as Izuku felt. An hour? That was all they had to pack up their things and say goodbye to everyone? There was a moment of awkward silence. Mina stared at her hands, and Shouto glared at the ground. Ford and Stan both looked decidedly unhappy. Ochako took one of Izuku's hands in her own, and shot him a conflicted look that matched his own inner turmoil. After everything they'd been through, all the friends they made, was it really over, just like that? Ford cleared his throat. While the kids collect everything and say their goodbyes, do you mind if I run some tests on that portal? Nothing that will interfere with its ability to stay open. But if we can figure out how it safely connects our 2 worlds, then maybe I could create a stable portal that stays open. Hope blossomed in Izuku's chest. That would be great. I know the portal itself is made by the villain, but if we could see how he made it and replicate it, we could create something longer lasting. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Kirigiri himself insists he doesn't know how he sent you here. I'd be interested to see if someone on this end can figure it out. Although I doubt many people would be happy about a portal connecting our world to an unknown dimension. And somehow I get the feeling officials in your world would feel the same. Stan waved him off, grinning. Who cares what they think? Not like they have to know. And if time really flies by faster here, We could have that portal open before you kiddos know it. Mina jumped to her feet. I'll call everyone and let them know what's happening. I'm sure we'll figure this out. This is goodbye for now, not forever. Shoto got up and followed her out. Ford stood. I'll go grab my instruments, then. Izuku turned to Ochako. We should probably start packing, I guess. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Like Mina said, this wasn't goodbye forever. It couldn't be. So, 3 days, huh? Yeah. Shouta and Stan both stood in the kitchen, watching as Ford took measurements on Kurogiri's portal. Frankly, Shouta wasn't sure what to think about Stan. His brother seemed fine enough, although worryingly eager to open a portal between their two dimensions. Stan, on the other hand, there was something about him that Shouta couldn't place. Something that set his nerves on end. He had a sneaking suspicion that had Stan been in their universe, Shouta wouldn't be working with him so casually. But it wasn't like he had enough evidence to assume criminality. Plus, this wasn't his universe, so it wasn't his problem. And Stan had apparently taken in Shouta's students for over 3 months, during which they'd clearly grown fond of him and his brother. Fonder than they seemed to be of Shouta. The wary looks they kept sending him, when Midoriya and Uraraka, and later Ashido and Todoroki, went upstairs, were definitely concerning. And as much as Shouta racked his brain, he couldn't figure out what he might have done to deserve them. Even his ruse a few days ago wasn't enough cause for wariness like that. The first few weeks they were here, the kids talked about you school heroes all the time, Stan said suddenly, and Shouta turned to him curiously. Eventually they stopped mentioning you much at all. Probably because they realized no help was coming from your end and we'd have to do everything to get them home ourselves. Despite knowing logically that there was no way they could have come faster, and no way of knowing that time worked differently where his students had been sent to, Shouta couldn't completely suppress his wince. We're here now. Stan scoffed. Yeah, now that the dust has settled and everything is fine. Shouta raised an eyebrow. Were things not fine before? Ask the kids if you want to know so bad. I'm not telling you anything they don't want said. Interesting. You care about them a lot, don't you? Shouta mused. It made sense, especially if he'd housed them for so long. It was just strange when he compared it to his own time frame. 3 days wasn't very long to get attached to someone, after all. Just don't need the brats complaining to me that I blabbed everything to their teacher, Stan said, with clearly forced nonchalance. In the background, Ford made a pleased noise. Oh, this is some good data. It'll take a while, but I can definitely make something out of this. At that, Stan's expression instantly softened. Mr. Pines, a man in his early 20s wearing a baseball cap and a green t-shirt with a question mark on it, rushed into the room. They're really leaving today? Stan winced. Yeah, it was really sudden. He jerked a thumb towards Shouta. This guy finally showed up, and he's taking them back to their world with him. The newcomer seemed to notice Shouta, and his eyes widened, looking distinctly unhappy. Are you one of those heroes, then? I am, Shouta confirmed dryly. Sorry this is so sudden. We don't know how long the portal will be open for. Baseball cap winced. Hopefully for a while. He motioned towards the door. Word spread around that the kids are leaving. We've basically got an angry mob outside. Curious, Shouta moved towards the window. Baseball cap wasn't joking. Practically the whole town seemed to have gathered outside of the house, and no one was looking happy. It wasn't just people, either. In a world that decidedly did not have quirks, Shouta could see a bear with 9 heads, a few minotaurs, more of the garden gnome things, and, was that an actual unicorn? 3 months was much longer than 3 days, sure. But was it really enough time that an entire town of people and miscellaneous supernatural creatures would be this distraught by them leaving? Not for the first time in this past hour, Shouta found himself wondering what exactly his students had gotten themselves into. Geez, I hope they'll actually buy some stuff while they're here. Despite his words, Stan was grinning. Just let Wendy, McGucket, and those friends of theirs inside. Everyone else can wait their turn while we sort this out. And let the kids know everyone is here. They should be done packing by now, unless they're dragging their feet. Ochako was definitely dragging her feet. It was stupid, she knew. She'd wanted to finally go home for so long. She missed her mom and dad. She missed Ida. She missed the chance to become a hero and save people and finally give her parents the life they deserved. So why, now that Aizawa was here and they could finally go home, did everything feel so awful? If anyone can figure out how to open a more stable portal, it's Ford, Shadow said softly, even as he stared blankly at the remaining clothes he had to pack away. Right. It's just for a while, not for forever, Izuku agreed. Do you think once we're home, we'll lose access to our supernatural abilities, like how we can't use our quirks here? Just like, he trailed off. Just like in the bubble, went unsaid, but they all knew what he'd meant. Ochako hoped not. As much as her white hair still shocked her every time she looked in the mirror, her ability was a part of her now. She'd saved her friends with it countless times. It was weird not having it for the short time they were in the bubble. She couldn't imagine never having it again. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out, Mina declared, zipping up her duffel bag. And we'll do it together. We might not have Stan and Ford and Suze and Wendy and... Her voice grew quieter as she listed the friends they were going to leave behind, before stopping and shaking her head. But we'll still have each other, and we'll get through this together. Together, Ochako agreed softly. Mystery crew forever, right? Right. Hearing her friend's affirmations made her heart just a bit lighter. It would hurt to leave Gravity Falls behind for now, but they would help each other get through it, no matter what. Dudes, Ochako turned as Suze ran up the stairs, panting. You dudes almost finished? There's an entire crowd outside waiting to say goodbye. He sniffed, eyes watery. No, no one is happy to see you go. Ochako exchanged glances with the others. We'll be down in a minute, she promised. If no one knew when the portal might close, the least they could do was make sure they had enough time to say goodbye to all of their friends. Suze wasn't kidding. Wendy, Candy, Grenda, Pacifica, and McGucket had all been let inside, but Shadow could see what looked like the entirety of the town outside the shack. Something warm nestled in Shadow's chest. Despite how much it hurt to be leaving, knowing just how many people here cared about them, even after all this time, he still had a little trouble believing it. You're really leaving then? Pacifica asked, as everyone took in the duffel bags they'd packed up. Yeah. There was a moment of somber silence. Izuku cleared his throat. Should we step outside for a minute and address everyone? Then we can come back in and say individual goodbyes before we go. Sounds like a plan. Wendy shot Aizawa a look. You should probably stay inside. Town's not gonna be a fan of the guy who's taking our heroes away, even if you're a hero yourself. Aizawa shrugged, looking intrigued but not denying Wendy's words. Fine with me. The rest of them stepped outside. Immediately, the crowd started pestering them with questions, worried and angry exclamations blending together into a dull roar. Okay, quiet down, people, Stan called out. In a show of just how much respect he now commanded in Gravity Falls, the crowd actually quieted. Yes, the kids are going back home to their own world. Instantly, boos rang out. But, we're working on a way to make sure they can come back whenever they want. Now the booing was replaced by cheers. We'll be back as soon as we can, Mina promised. And while we're gone, don't forget to stop by the mystery shack, Ochako added with a grin. A certain old man might get lonely without us around. Oh, shut up. Stan rolled his eyes and ruffled her hair fondly as everyone laughed. Shadow could hear some, like Wendy's friends, Mayor Tyler, and even Gideon, promising to visit. Shadow. He was going to miss this place. He was going to miss it a lot. Back inside, they were immediately swamped with hugs from Candy, Grenda, and Pacifica. I can't believe you guys are actually leaving, Grenda sniffed. Ugh, and I hate my dumb emotions for making me feel things. We're going to miss you so much, Candy agreed. Pacifica leaned toward Shadow. Are you going to be okay? She asked, speaking quietly so the adults couldn't overhear. I just got away from my parents, and now you're going back to yours. It doesn't feel fair. It didn't feel fair at all. Shadow had gotten used to this. Sharing a room with his best friends, spending time around adults who actually cared about him. Stan and Ford were more fatherly to him than his actual father was. And now, they had barely an hour to say rushed goodbyes to everyone and everything here. A part of him didn't want to leave. Didn't want to cross through that portal. For a moment, he genuinely considered deciding to stay. Except, He'd be without Mina and Ochako and Izuku. And as much as he hated his father, he missed Fayumi. He couldn't do that to her, especially after she'd already lost one brother. "I'll be fine," he promised. Pacificer raised a disbelieving eyebrow, and he nodded his head towards the others. "I've still got people looking out for me. I'll be okay." "If you're sure." "I am, but thank you." After a moment of hesitation, he hugged her again, and she happily reciprocated. When she finally drew back, she punched his arm lightly. "Hey, it's nothing. People like us have to stick together, right?" "Right," Shoto agreed. "You'll look after Waddles until we come back," Mina confirmed. They'd talked about it, and as much as everyone hated it, none of them had a home that could properly support a growing pig bear. Pacifica nodded, smiling and petting the pig bear next to her. "He's in good hands." And the best part was, Shoto knew that was true. Suze, Wendy, and McGucket were next. Suze was already sobbing as they hugged him. "You dudes are already heroes, but you're gonna be the best heroes ever in your world. But be careful, okay? You won't have us watching your back anymore." "We will," Mina said. "You don't need to worry about us, I promise." There was a pause as everyone scoffed at that. Shoto would feel insulted, but it was accurate, so instead he just felt amused. "I can't thank you kids enough for what you did for me," McGucket insisted. "We're gonna find a way to make sure you can come here whenever you want. I promise." He gave them a thumbs up. "And Izuku, you gotta stop being so hard on yourself. Keep working on your tech." Izuku let out a small laugh. "You got it, McGucket." Wendy held out her hand and gave each of them a fist bump. "You guys better not forget what I taught you. Keep practicing, alright? I want to see how far you've come the next time we see each other." "We won't get rusty," Shoto promised. "Especially considering we'll be at UA. We're going to use what you've taught us to be better heroes and blow everyone else away." Wendy grinned. "That's what I like to hear." And then it was just Stan and Ford. "This is just goodbye for now," Ford said softly. "As soon as we can, we'll contact you." "We can't wait," Ochako said, voice wavering. Stan just looked at them for a long time, eyes watery. "You knuckleheads were nothing but a nuisance, and I'm glad to be rid of you." Mina grinned, wiping away her own tears. "We're gonna miss you too, Stan." In lieu of a response, Stan grabbed them all and pulled them into a tight hug. A moment later, Ford joined, and then everyone else. There was a long moment where they all just held each other. Finally, reluctantly, everyone broke apart. The mystery crew exchanged long glances, then grabbed their bags and turned to Aizawa. "Ready?" Aizawa asked. "All right, let's go." Shoto waved at his friends, and then walked away. This wasn't goodbye. They'd see each other again. Some part of him knew it. He stepped through the portal. Unlike the first time, when he'd been disoriented and had known nothing of the supernatural, this time, it was pretty obvious that the portal was being held open by something. Something? A familiar something. This was the genus loci. The loci was what had opened the portal. And while Shoto couldn't recognize it then, it had felt the same way the first time he'd come through. Which meant the loci was what had brought the four of them to Gravity Falls in the first place. But why? Why them? There was a flashing of images. Some sort of starry animal. The zodiac circle, but different, with 10 signs instead of 11, and the stitched heart on Robbie's sweatshirt rather than Ochako's sun and Izuku's lightning. Strangely dimensional surfaces somehow communicating with each other. An eye. And then they were on the other side of the portal. Aizawa stepped through last, and it immediately closed behind them. Shoto looked at the others. Judging by their startled expressions, they'd seen and felt all of that too. Ochako still had long white hair, and Shoto could still feel his fire underneath his fingertips, just like he could feel half hot, half cold again. He looked at Ochako and flicked his hands, before nodding. Her eyes widened, and she concentrated for a moment, before nodding back. It seemed that unlike in Cipher's bubble, they really did keep their magical abilities alongside regaining their quirks. Inside the room they'd been transported to, All Might, Principal Nedzu, Recovery Girl, and a plain-looking police officer with a lie-detecting quirk were all waiting, expressions brightening as they realized all four of them were accounted for. Young Midoriya, young Todoroki, Ashido, Uraraka. Izuku flinched, but seemed to force a smile as All Might ran up to them. It's really great to see you again, All Might. Already, Shadow's friend was tearing up again. Are there any injuries I need to tend to? Recovery Girl asked, all business, starting with Izuku. None, Izuku told her, managing a small smile. The rest of them shook their heads, and Recovery Girl seemed to scan them, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Shadow's bandages. Oh, right. A part of him was curious if Recovery Girl's quirk could actually fix his cuts. But considering that her quirk worked by using the patient's own energy, and the wounds kept reopening, he didn't want to know what that would do to his stamina. They're fine, he promised, and the policeman couldn't tell it was a lie because it technically wasn't. They were as fine as they were ever going to be. They were transported to an entirely different world, Aizawa said shortly. Time worked differently there. It's been 3.5 months for them. The teachers seemed to startle at that, before looking at the police officer, who nodded in confirmation. Fascinating, the principal said. In that case, while your families have been worried sick about you for, I'm sure you've been even more worried. Ochako brightened. Are they here? They are, Nedzu confirmed, smiling. And I'm happy to inform you that Kirigiri is safely locked in Tartarus, and we're taking measures to make sure no warp quirks can enter or exit Yua. This will not be happening again, I assure you. Shadow wondered if he should mention that they were hoping that a more permanent portal could be opened, but decided that Aizawa would probably let Nedzu know anyway, and there were other things he needed to worry about. Are all of our families here? He asked cautiously. Next to him, Mina tensed, grabbing his arm. The teachers seemed to exchange glances. Young Todoroki, All Might began hesitantly. Your sister is already here. We've let Endeavor know that you're safe, but he hasn't arrived yet. I'm sure he'll be here soon. Shadow could feel himself relaxing. Fayumi was here, and his father wasn't. That was the best-case scenario. Okay. Before they were let out, the policeman, Detective Tsukachi, asked them a few questions. They were pretty generic: how long they had been in the other world. Were they safe? Did they think anything dangerous was going to come over? And they all answered as honestly as they could, while leaving as much out as they could. Shadow was sure he wasn't the only one who would never trust the police to actually do their jobs properly after the past few months. Finally, they were led into the room where their families were. Izuku. Shadow watched as a green-haired woman who could only have been Izuku's mother embraced her son, both of them already sobbing. Mom, Dad. Ochako ran over to a middle-aged man and woman, who both held her tightly. Her father was crying almost as hard as the Midoriyas were. You're back, you're safe, your hair. Ochako laughed. It's a long story. I missed you guys so much. Meanwhile, Mina was hugging a man with her fluffy pink hair and a woman with the same black and gold eyes. Shadow watched all of this and tried to push down those small strings of jealousy. Shadow. And then Fayumi was there. He'd missed her. A lot more than he realized. You're okay, Fayumi whispered hoarsely, holding him tightly. I'm okay, Shadow confirmed. Are you okay? Was everything okay at home? He could feel her wince, and he tensed. It was all right, she hurried to say. Father was angry, but he wasn't really taking it out on me. Her voice lowered even more. Shadow, is there any way we can get you out of going home tonight? Shadow. Both of them froze. Endeavor was there, entering the room, looking absolutely furious. Of course, Shadow realized. To him, I was stupid enough to get myself captured. Of course he's angry. He watched with an odd sort of detachment as his father drew closer. So, we're definitely going to have that sleepover we'd all decided that we'd have when we got home, right? Mina said, loud enough that everyone in the room could hear her. When Shadow looked her way, she was smiling, but her eyes were locked on Endeavor, burning with protective fury. Izuku wiped his eyes. Why, yeah, that's right, he turned to his mother. Mom, do you think we'd all decided we wanted to have a sleepover when we got home, and we definitely have enough room for my friends to stay over for the night? Izuku's mother beamed at him. Of course, I'd be happy to have them over. Are you sure that's what you want to do tonight? Ochako's dad asked her hesitantly. She nodded vigorously. Yeah, it really is. I know I just got home, but we've been talking about this for a while. Shadow will not. Endeavor interrupted with a rumble, still glaring down at Shadow. After being kidnapped for 3 days, you want to have a sleepover? Don't be ridiculous. Shadow glared right back at his father, imagining how satisfying it would be to activate his flames now and burn Endeavor's head to a crisp, preferably while hearing him scream in pain. What? That wasn't. He hated his father, but he'd never want to. It was like the room was suddenly spinning, the imagery from the portal flashing in his head again. Something was wrong. I think it's a great idea. Fayumi's words snapped Shadow back to the present, and he stared at his sister. Somehow, she'd maneuvered herself in front of him, smiling politely at their father. It sounds like he's been really excited for this. And it also sounds like staying with his friends tonight would make him feel safest. A part of Shadow wondered what the hell she was doing. Fayumi had only managed to avoid being hurt for so long because she knew how to mediate. Directing their father's full furious attention on her like this was dangerous. Don't worry, they'll be safe with me, Izuku's mom promised. There was something steely in her eyes now, too, something that hadn't been there seconds ago. I know you're the number 2 hero, and you're worried about your son, but I promise he'll be perfectly safe at our house. No one outside this room would know he was there, after all. That's right, Fayumi jumped in again. Since you're so worried about his safety for tonight, wouldn't it be best for Shadow to be somewhere no one would suspect him to be staying? There was a long moment of silence, and what seemed to be a staring contest between Shadow's sister and his father. They all knew Endeavor admitting that the true reason he wanted Shadow home to punish him for being kidnapped wouldn't go over well with all the other adults in the room. Finally, after what seemed like ages, Endeavor huffed, looking away. Just for tonight? He gave Shadow a warning look. You will be home tomorrow. Shadow just watched him leave, still somewhat stunned. Fayumi squeezed his hand tightly. Mina's father broke the silence. What a cheerful man. Shadow actually found himself snorting out a laugh at that. Home sweet home, I guess? Izuku's home was small and cozy. Mina immediately loved it. Izuku's mom, who introduced herself as Inko and insisted they call her that, made dinner for everyone. It was the first time in months that Mina had gotten to eat a Japanese-style dinner, and it was absolutely fantastic. A part of her would definitely miss the Western-style meals, though, and right now she was sitting around a table laughing with her friends, but it was different than when she'd been sitting around the table in the shack kitchen, laughing with her friends and Stan and sometimes Suze and eventually Ford, Waddles hovering by their feet and waiting for scraps. But this was nice too. At least she still got to enjoy dinner with her friends. Even if she wouldn't starting tomorrow. It was hard to believe that this morning she'd woken up in their attic and eaten breakfast in the mystery shack. Things had changed so much, so suddenly, and Mina couldn't help but feel completely unbalanced by it all. I can't believe you were really away for 3 months, Inko gushed, as they made their way through dinner. Were you okay? Were you safe? We were fine, Mom, I promise, Izuku insisted, smiling, carefully not mentioning Weird Mageddon. There was this really nice man named Stan, and after the portal dropped us off in his kitchen, he took us in and let us stay the entire time. And his employees, Suze and Wendy, were really nice, and so was his brother Ford, and we made a lot of new friends. We won a photo contest by getting pictures of a lake monster that chased us around for a while. Then we went fishing, Shadow offered. Inko's eyes widened. A lake monster? That sounds dangerous. No, it was okay, Izuku insisted. It was actually just another one of Maguket's robots, and he just wanted people to pay attention to him. Mostly his son, although I don't know if that ever worked out. He trailed off, looking concerned. Izuku and I introduced Shadow and Ochako to Dungeons and Dragons, Mina rushed to add helpfully. Or the other world's equivalent. We still need to introduce them to actual D&D. I don't know, is it as fun as playing DD&D, Real Life Edition? Ochako snickered. You can't compare the actual game to that, Izuku insisted. We had fun with what we got through of the regular campaign, so I'm sure you'll like our world's version as well. Inko watched them all, eyes watery again. It looks like you've made some really good friends, Izuku. I'm so happy to hear that. And thank you 3 for being such good friends to my son. I was so worried when he started UA that it would be like his other schools, and then this kidnapping. Mom, Izuku protested. Shadow shrugged. Izuku's a fantastic friend. Of course we're good friends to him. He deserves nothing less. Shadow, Wait, are you crying again? Did I say something wrong? Please don't cry, Deku, Miss Inko. Before they settled into Izuku's room, Inko pulled Shadow aside. Their conversation ended a few minutes later, and he joined them, looking perplexed. Something wrong? Mina asked, concerned. Not really, it's just, he looked at Izuku. She asked if I was safe at home, or if I needed an excuse to stay longer. Did you tell her? Izuku shook his head. I didn't. But Mom's perceptive. She saw how you acted when Endeavor was standing over you. How I acted? The rest of them exchanged glances. Shadow, you flinched, Mina said softly. And you looked angry and terrified. Shadow blinked. I did? I don't... He cut himself off, staring at his hands. There was something. It felt wrong. Something feels wrong, and I can't figure out what it is. Ochako frowned. What kind of wrong? I don't know. Shadow made a frustrated noise. And I keep thinking about those images from when we crossed the portal, and whatever the hell they could mean. Images? Izuku asked. I definitely felt the loci holding the portal open, and I was wondering when we were going to discuss that, because apparently that's the whole reason we ended up in Gravity Falls in the first place, which why us specifically. But I didn't see any images. I did, Mina admitted, thinking back on it. That weird starry thing with the glowing eyes, right? And that altered zodiac circle, with Robbie's symbol but not Izuku's or Ochako's. Shadow nodded. I think I saw a few more images, but they went by too quickly, and I couldn't make sense of them. The loci's always focused on you too, Ochako pointed out. Deku and I have felt it once or twice, but it's always showing up for you guys. Maybe it's because of that altered zodiac that we're not a part of. But why would there be something like that in the first place? Didn't Ford say he found the one we're a part of in a cave, painted ages ago? As for why us specifically, Shadow's eyes widened. Weird Mageddon. We were brought to Gravity Falls specifically during the summer when everything went down, and as soon as Weird Mageddon was over, the portal opened again to let us go home. Mina groaned, flopping down on Izuku's bed. So we were, what, the backup plan, in case the apocalypse actually happened. The loci wanting to make sure everyone on the Zodiac was in town, just in case. But then what's with that other Zodiac it showed us? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe once Ford and Megakit get the portal back open again, we can work together to figure things out, Izuku suggested. He paused for a moment, then continued. And even if we were brought there in order to stop Weird Mageddon, I still don't regret being there, you know? Definitely, Shadow agreed. What we did there still mattered, and so do all the friends we made. Most of the conversation was tabled there, and the four of them drifted off into happier topics until they started drifting off to sleep completely. Before she could fall asleep completely, Mina nudged Shadow. Are you really doing okay? She whispered. The other images you saw, and you said something felt wrong. What do you think it could be? I don't know, Shadow admitted, just as softly. One of them, I think one of the images was Cipher's eye. Mina's gut twisted. Sleep did not come easy that night. So, how are the kids? Shadow considered his answer while Hisashi waited impatiently. They seem to be doing all right, at least on the surface. I have a lot of questions about Uraraka's hair change and Todoroki's bandages, but on the whole, they seemed mostly unharmed. He hesitated. They looked almost afraid of me. There was something weird about that place, that town, even without considering how quirks didn't work and the supernatural seemed to exist as an everyday occurrence instead, considering how nonplussed both the citizens and his students were with the gnomes and unicorns. Shadow was pretty sure he'd also seen a giant eyeball with bat wings floating around, but no one else had even commented on it. From the first day assessment, Hisashi wondered. I guess since they got taken immediately during the OSJ, that's all they know of you. I considered that, Shadow admitted, but I don't think so. It's nothing like how they looked at me before Kurogiri. Something happened over there, and I don't know what. Hisashi frowned. Do you think they were in danger? You said no one could use their quirks over there. Combine that with actual supernatural stuff, and they could have gotten in trouble. Maybe, Shadow agreed. Todoroki's bandages are concerning, and so is the fact that he won't let Recovery Girl look at them. But aside from that, they do seem to be genuinely unharmed, including Midoriya, miraculously. Although Shouta supposed that was because quirks weren't working. And they all seemed excited at the prospect of returning to that town. I doubt they'd be so excited if their lives were genuinely in danger. His friend let out a long breath. That's a relief, at least. Yeah, something definitely happened while they were there, though. Uraraka's white hair and Todoroki's bandages aside, the town basically formed a mob when the news spread that they were leaving. One of their new friends mentioned that the people saw them as heroes, so clearly something big happened. Not to mention the first name basis they all seemed to be on. Shouta could partially understand it considering the names of the people he'd met there, and the name of the town. It seemed like it was located in some English-speaking country, which also probably meant that they were speaking English over there, and considering Shouta was good at the language but not that good, and he could understand everything perfectly. He needed some headache medicine. But with all that considered, it made sense that his students would be using their first names. On the other hand, they still kept calling each other that when they returned, and there was something so easy about the way they'd said it, that made Shouta think they were on a genuine first name basis. Which, after 3 months stuck in another world, wasn't completely surprising, but it did add another layer of complexity to everything. Hisashi put a hand on his shoulder. At least they're back now. Whatever happened over there, they're finally home. You can stop worrying every second about them. Shouta rolled his eyes. Somehow, I doubt that. Besides, whatever happened, I doubt they'd get over it completely just because they're home. He was definitely going to keep an eye on those 4. Hopefully, he could figure out just what had them so nervous around him. Shouta checked his watch. You know, we should probably leave soon. We should probably leave soon, Mina mimicked, still hastily tying her tie. It's been over 3 months since we last went to school. Give us a break. Shouta shrugged, unbothered, before reaching over and redoing Izuku's tie. Maybe you should have worn an actual tie at the party, he said. Then at least you'd know how to tie it now. Izuku pouted. I just wanted one night of not having to worry about that. Besides, even if I tried, I'd still probably end up looking silly in front of all of those rich people. Yeah, but who cares what they think, Ochako called out, from where she was stuffing the last of her omelet into her mouth. Mom, who was watching all of them with an amused expression, finally spoke up. You 4 went to a party that needed a tie? Yeah, our friend Pacifica invited us, Mina explained. Well, she wasn't exactly our friend at the time, but she was by the end of the party. And it turns out her parents are total jerks, and eventually they had to sell their mansion. But Pacifica got to stay because Magukit is the new owner, and he's nice like that. And then we had a second party that didn't involve suits and dresses and was a lot more fun. I see. Mom clearly did not see, but Izuku didn't blame her, because it really did sound confusing when put that way. Shouta finished adjusting his tie, and Izuku bent down again to stuff the last remaining supplies into his backpack. Just before zipping it up, he paused to take stock and consider. Hey, do you think we should bring the size-changing light, just in case? Oh, that's a good idea, Ochako agreed. You never know when that will come in handy, especially for hero training. I'll bring it then. Izuku put the light in his backpack and slipped his dagger into his jacket. Probably won't need the memory gun though, right? Is there someone whose memory we're going to erase? Shouta pointed out. Right, good point. That can definitely stay at home. Mina tucked away her grappling hook in whatever weird pocket dimension in her clothes she always seemed to keep it in, before considering another of her weapons. Hey, do you think the teachers would get mad if I bring my gun? I mean, Snipe's known for these, right? They shouldn't get too upset. Mom's head swiveled so fast, for a moment Izuku worried she'd get whiplash. Where did you get that? Ford let you keep that? Ochako asked. Yeah, after Weird. She paused, glancing at Mom. After everything that went down, he said I could keep it. Don't worry, Miss Inko, I know how to use it. It's perfectly safe. It's a gun, Mom said, somewhat hysterically, and going by her reaction, Izuku was glad Mina didn't mention Weird Mageddon. He knew he'd have to tell her at some point, but he was kind of hoping to put it off until her worry from him being sent to Gravity Falls in the first place calmed down. Maybe keep that at home for now, he offered to Mina. Let's see how they react with the grappling hook first. Mina pouted, but didn't argue. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Ochako finished gathering her things as well and walked back over to them, taking Izuku's hand and smiling. At least I don't have to worry about them confiscating my amulet now. Would they? Izuku wondered. I mean, we know what it did, but it would just look like a necklace to them. Sure, until I started using it. Now I don't have to worry about that at all. Oh, Izuku turned back to Mom, who was looking at their entwined hands. Are you two, did you? They're dating, Shoto offered blandly. You're dating? Oh, look at the time, we really do need to be getting to school. Izuku pulled Ochako towards the door, his face heating up. Ochako was blushing too, but she was smiling just as much as Izuku was. He could hear Mina laughing in the background. Halfway to school, a thought occurred to Izuku, and he startled. Guys, I think we're going to have to tell All Might that you know about One for All, he murmured, so the people around them couldn't hear. It's his quirk too, after all. It would be wrong not to tell him. That's fine, Shoto assured him. You're right, he has a right to know that we know. Ochako nudged him slightly. Are you gonna be okay? After the bubble and everything. You flinched when we saw All Might last night. He had. As horrible as it was, Izuku had seen All Might, his hero since forever and mentor for almost a year, and had flinched. Because he couldn't get the fake version out of his head. Because he couldn't help but remember killing the fake All Might with the quirk All Might gave him. He took a deep breath. I'll be fine. I have to be fine. And anyways, avoiding him will just make things worse, right? And I can't avoid him. He's All Might. He's our teacher, and after everything he's done for me, I could never do that, so I'm just going to have to push past it. Do you think telling him about it would help? Mina asked quietly. Not about everything, but maybe a little about the bubble, so he understands. Izuku had thought about that. But the idea of telling All Might about the bubble, about how it was his own fault that the bubble existed and how he'd accidentally started an apocalypse, about how the fake All Might had tried to kill him, about how he had killed the fake All Might. He shuddered. I don't know. Not right now. Maybe one day, for sure. But I can't do it right now. Ochako squeezed his hand. That's okay. We'll follow your lead, then. Izuku took in a deep breath. He'd probably have to tell All Might someday. But for now, he'd much rather try and forget. As soon as they opened the classroom door, shouts rang out from their classmates. It's them. They're really here. Ochako had a moment to push down the memory of their classmates greeting them in the bubble, firmly reminding herself that this was real and they really were her real classmates this time, before Ida was standing in front of them, beaming, eyes shining with relief. Midoriya, Uraraka, you're both okay. It was the real Ida. Ochako laughed, somewhat giddily, and threw her arms around her friend. Ida, we missed you so much. Ida jumped slightly, before reciprocating, strong arms wrapping around her tightly. Izuku's eyes were already watery. It's so good to see you, Ida. It's good to see you both as well. I was so worried when I returned with the teachers, but you were gone. I thought I was too late. It was such a relief to hear that you were all safe. Thanks, Ida. A part of Ochako still kind of wished they could have shared their adventures with Ida. But if he was instrumental in getting the teachers and making sure help arrived for everyone else on time, then it was probably a good thing he wasn't sent to Gravity Falls as well. Of course, Ida straightened up and Ochako let go, before he turned to Shoto and Mina. And you two as well. My apologies for not including you. I was also worried about you both. Mina waved him off. Don't worry about it. You know Izuku and Ochako better than you know us. It makes sense. Ida blinked. Izuku and Ochako. I didn't know you were on a first-name basis. It's a recent development. Hey, give us some space to say hello as well. Kirishima maneuvered himself around Ada, beaming at them. It's so great to see you guys. Were you okay? Was it scary? Hagakure piped up. Where did the portal guy take you, anyways? Also, no offense Uraraka, but what happened to your hair? Zero added. Ochako laughed. We're fine. It was a little scary, but it all worked out in the end. Oregon, and, well, it's a really long story. Ciro blinked. Oregon? Where's that? It's a state in America. Dumbass, came Bakugou's voice from behind the main crowd of classmates. Well, how was I supposed to know that? Are there even any important states in America besides New York and California? Chicago, or something. Chicago's a city, idiot. Shadow sighed. I don't suppose we could actually get into the classroom. There was a bit of embarrassed murmuring before everyone broke apart, and Ochako finally made her way into the classroom. They seemed to have been the last 4 to arrive, as everyone else was already there, all looking at them with interest. Were you really in America? Ajiro asked. Why would the villains send you to America? Izuku shrugged. We don't actually think Kurogiri meant to send us there. We think there was something else that opened the portal and separated us like that. Like something specific to Gravity Falls that sort of hijacked it, I guess. Gravity Falls. It took a moment for the question to sink in. Judging by Izuku's face, Ochako thought he was feeling the same amount of weirdness at the thought of someone not knowing about Gravity Falls. It made sense, of course, because they were back in Japan, and also a literal universe away, but it was still probably going to take some getting used to. The town in Oregon that we ended up in, Shadow explained. Ha. Still, that must have been a cool trip, Hagakure said. Bakugou, still in his seat, scoffed. What, getting sent to the middle of bumfuck nowhere America while the rest of us actually fought villains? Nothing special about them. They're just a bunch of extras who got themselves kidnapped and then couldn't do anything about it. Ochako glared at him and opened her mouth to talk back, before the image of the fake Bakugou getting shot and killed by Wendy flashed in her mind. We made a friend that killed an alternate version of you. Who exactly are you calling extras? Was something that she definitely couldn't say. Probably best to keep her mouth shut. Izuku looked like he was also reliving that moment, eyes wide. Then he seemed to come to a conclusion because he swallowed and stood up straighter, eyes locked steadily on Bakugou. You say that like you would have done any better had our luck been reversed, Kaken. Actually, knowing you, I think you would have done worse than we did. Which, Ochako did remember both the battle exercise and Izuku mentioning that Bakugou mostly trained with his quirk. He probably would have had a worse freak out than Shadow did if he'd lost it. What was that, Deku? Bakugou leapt up with a roar, palms filled with explosions, heading right for Izuku. You shitty bastard, you don't know fucking anything. Izuku flinched at his words, but then nimbly dodged away from Bakugou's explosions, the fire hitting the desk behind him instead. There was a moment where both of them looked at the burned desk, wide-eyed. A small smile grew on Izuku's face, and Bakugou's glare sharpened. The latter tried to attack again, and once again Izuku dodged out of the way. Man. It had been so long, Ochako had forgotten what a jerk Bakugou was. He made Pacifica at her worst look like a sweet-natured girl. And really, Ochako didn't want to take this lying down. Sure, it looked like Izuku could handle it, but he'd insulted all of them, and that was her friend and boyfriend Bakugou was currently trying to attack. They couldn't just let him get away with it. Shadow locked eyes with her, nodded, and turned to Yayurazu. Do you think you could make a transparent explosion-proof jar, 6 inches tall, with a lid that has holes for breathing in it? Yayurazu blinked at the odd request, but nodded, pulling a jar with those specifications out from under her shirt. That's 12 centimeters, right? What do you need something so specific for? You'll see. Ochako reached into Izuku's bag and pulled out the size-changing light, making sure it was on shrink, and pointing it at Bakugou. Instantly, he started shrinking smaller and smaller, and seconds later he was about 3 inches tall. Bakugou had barely enough time to let out a surprised shout before Mina grabbed him by the back of his jacket. Shadow opened the jar, and Mina plopped him inside, before screwing the lid back on tightly. Hey, what the fuck is this? Miniature explosions burst against the walls of the jar, but it didn't crack. Yayurazu was super cool. This is the timeout jar, Ochako told him cheerfully. Hero students who attack their classmates instead of actually trying to be heroes can stay in the jar for a while. What the fuck? Bakugou's voice was both angry and extremely squeaky. A wave of snickers passed around the classroom, although most still looked stunned. Where did you get something like that? Kaminari wondered. as Izuku put the light back in his bag, clearly trying not to laugh. "Oh, Oregon." "Man," Kaminari whistled. "Oregon must be a weird place." Mina grinned and slapped a hand on his shoulder. "You have no idea." Ada slammed his hands on a desk, getting everyone's attention. "Class is about to start, everyone get in their seats." He paused, looking at Bakugou, who was still trying to escape the jar. "But first, maybe someone could put Bakugou on his own desk, instead of his seat. That way he can still see." "You're not going to ask your Araka to release him?" Juru said dryly, grinning as Ochako happily did as Ida asked, Bakugou still cursing at her. The reflection in Ida's glasses shone brightly, and Ochako realized he was barely keeping up a straight face himself. "I think spending some time in the timeout jar is a good class policy for if a classmate attacks another unprovoked." "Quiet down." At the sound of Aizawa's voice, there was a sudden, last-minute scramble, and everyone was in their seats or on their desk by the time the teacher walked in the door. "Homeroom's starting." He took them all in. "Where's Bakugou?" "He's in the timeout jar," Shoto said, face not betraying a single expression as he gestured towards the jar. "The what?" "It's for hero students who attack other hero students to sit in and think about what they've done, sensei," Tsuyu said, equally as deadpan. Inside the jar, Bakugou let out some more expletives and tried a few more futile explosions. Aizawa stared at the jar for a long, tired moment. Then his gaze flickered over each member of the mystery crew, and Ochako suspected he'd connected the dots. "Can he hear what I have to say in there? I have an important announcement to make." "He can, sensei," Yayurazu confirmed. "Right. Then let him out after homeroom is done." Sitting behind him as she did, Ochako was pretty sure she was the only one who heard Bakugou's betrayed gasp. "We've still got important matters to deal with." He paused dramatically. "The UA Sports Festival is coming up." Excitement swept around the room, and Ochako realized she was no exception. The sports festival. Unlike what the bubble had implied, they hadn't missed it. They could still compete, get seen by pros, get internships. And not only that, they'd be doing it with all the skills they'd learned in Gravity Falls backing them up. "Hold on," Kaminari said. "Is that okay? After everything that happened with the villains?" There was a pause where Ochako could tell that most of their classmates were trying very hard not to look at the four of them, and she had to stop herself from rolling her eyes. "We're taking steps to circumvent anything like that happening again," Aizawa assured them. "Thankfully, we won't have to postpone it as far back as we thought, only a week, and in that time we're taking every possible precaution to make sure no one can break in anywhere." Ida's hand shot up. "Is that why heroics lessons have been cancelled for the next couple days?" "Yeah. We're making sure that every facility at UA is well protected." There were a few sighs of relief, but many classmates still looked nervous. "It's also to show everyone that US crisis management system is rock solid by holding the event." He sighed, then looked at each of them more seriously. "Above all, our sports festival is a huge chance. Heroes from all over the country will be watching, scouting for possible interns and sidekicks. Of course, joining a famous hero agency will net you more experience and popularity. Time is limited if you expect to go pro, then the path to your future will open up at this event. 1 chance a year, a total of just 3 chances. No aspiring heroes can afford to miss this event." And Ochako knew all of that, of course. She'd been so worried and excited about it, before everything. Now, there was still excitement, but a lot less worry. And there was something in the idea that saving all of reality wouldn't help them become pros as much as a sports festival would. Because even if people knew, no one saw them save it. That just felt kind of ridiculous. Aizawa dismissed homeroom, and Izuku went over to Bakugou's desk, pulling him out of the jar, carefully setting the jar far away from Bakugou as the miniature hero wannabe yelled at him, before getting out the light and regrowing him to normal size. As soon as he was back to normal, Bakugou lunged at Izuku, snarling with wordless rage and trying to grab the light. Izuku nimbly dodged him once again and tucked the light away, before sitting back down, completely ignoring Bakugou. Bakugou glared down at him. "Deku, you shitty bastard, what the hell was that? You don't just find something like that in fucking Oregon." "Have you ever been to Oregon, Bakugou?" Mina called out cheekily. "How would you know what can be found there?" You think you're funny, raccoon eyes? I'll kill you. Shut up and sit down before we put you in the jar again, Shadow said dryly, eyes narrowed. To Ochako's surprise, Bakugou actually sat. His glare didn't lessen. However, he spent the rest of the morning scowling at all of them, hands twitching like he couldn't wait to try and blow them up. Ochako found it rather easy to ignore him anyways. The rest of the morning passed by as a normal school morning might. Well, mostly. I can't believe it, Mina muttered as they left the class. She'd lost count of how many times she'd said and thought that phrase since this morning. I didn't even realize Present Mike was speaking in English. I just answered him. Everything on the board made total sense. It is nice to know that the fluency in English came back with us now that we're home, Izuku mused, as they headed towards the teacher's lounge, where All Might should be. I mean, it does make sense, since while things seemed mostly translated when we first arrived, by the end we were hearing everything in English and also hearing ourselves in English. I guess we're just fluent now. And if the portal really was the loci trying to make sure we prevented Weird Mageddon, it makes sense that it would make sure that we could understand everyone, and they could understand us. I wonder if Aizawa was affected, even though he was only there for an hour. I can't believe it, Mina repeated. I'm good at English. I'm actually good at a school subject now. How did this happen? Shadow raised an eyebrow at her. I thought we just went over how it happened. I'm being rhetorical. This is amazing. I'll never fail English again. Ochako laughed. I do get what you mean, though. Usually even the 3 months we spent in Gravity Falls shouldn't be enough to become this fluent. It's really cool. She paused, looking thoughtful. Wait, I think we're speaking in English right now. There was a moment of silence as they all considered that, and Shadow realized that yes, they had been speaking in English. This is probably going to take some getting used to, Izuku admitted with an awkward grin. Young Midoriya. Shadow spun around, nearly summoning his flames before forcing them down. Izuku jumped. Oh, All Might, this is great. Actually, the 4 of us need to talk to you, and it's kind of important, so if you're free. All Might paused briefly before his grin resumed. I am. I was hoping to talk to you as well, but I'd be happy to speak with all of you, this way. He led the 4 of them to the teacher's lounge and sat down on one of the couches. Izuku sat down across from him, and Ochako sat down next to Izuku, leaning up against his side encouragingly. Shadow took the spot on Izuku's other side, and Mina plopped down next to him. Now, what is it you wanted to speak with me about? All Might asked. Izuku sucked in a shaky breath, looking far more worried than he had been with Bakugou this morning, before letting it out. Right. Please don't get mad, All Might raised an eyebrow, and Izuku chuckled awkwardly. So, Aizawa told you about how it was actually over 3 months for us, and there was a lot of supernatural stuff in Gravity Falls. Well, some of it went into mindscape stuff and nightmares and memories, and basically, Ochako, Shadow, and Mina know about One for All now. Because they saw some stuff that sort of mentioned it, and I trust them a lot, with my life in fact, and they'd never do anything to betray that. But I thought you needed to know. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then All Might coughed up blood, and suddenly there was a skeleton of a man where All Might was a second ago, steam coming off of his body. Shadow leaned back, startled, Mina jumped a bit, and Ochako let out a small "oh." Izuku winced. I didn't mention this part though. Sorry. It's fine, young Midoriya. Skeleton All Might wiped the blood from his face. I was just surprised, is all. Even if I advise caution against telling most people, as the current holder of One for All, you're of course allowed to tell whoever you want, and I'll trust your judgment. Especially in this case, where it seems like there wasn't much of a choice. Izuku let out a breath of relief. All Might looked at the rest of them. I'm sure young Midoriya has said this, but this isn't something we'd like getting out, understand? Not just One for All, but this form as well. Of course, Shadow agreed immediately. It was perfectly understandable. People would panic if they knew how hurt All Might secretly was and panic even more at the idea of All for One. Villains shouldn't know that your quirk is transferable. Matter of fact, most heroes shouldn't either. He thought of what his father might do if he knew and decidedly did not shudder. We'll keep this a secret. All Might let out a breath of relief. But are you okay? Mina asked, worried. That injury looks terrible. And keeping up your big form seems like it would wear you out a lot, Ochako added. All Might blinked at them, then smiled slightly. Thank you for asking, young Ishido, young Uraraka. It has certainly limited the time I can be a hero each day, but on the whole, I am all right. Judging by Izuku's expression, Shoto wasn't entirely sure that was true. After the asi, has it shortened? Your time? All Might sighed. It has. I can only hold my hero form for about an hour and a half a day now. An hour and a half? That was a staggeringly small amount of time. Izuku hunched in on himself. I'm sorry. I'm sure we didn't make it easier for you at the asi. We weren't even there to help. There's no need to apologize. It certainly isn't any of your faults. All Might seemed to take in all of their worried faces because he gave them a smile. Never mind my time. You don't need to worry about that. More importantly, the sports festival is coming up, isn't it? Aizawa mentioned that quirks don't work in that world you were in, so I can't imagine you've had more practice controlling one for all. Izuku shook his head. This one, he broke off, eyes wide, hand shooting up to cover his mouth. Right? The bubble. Izuku had used one for all once and hadn't broken anything with it. But he'd used it against the fake All Might. Shoto hesitated before putting a hand on Izuku's shoulder. There was a certain incident one of the days we were there, where our quirks seemed to work. But it turned out to be fake, so it probably doesn't count. Probably, All Might agreed. Slowly, Izuku removed his hand from his mouth, shooting Shoto a grateful glance. Even so, he has us to help him out now too, Ochako pointed out. I'm sure together we can figure something out before the sports festival. There's no way we're gonna let Deku break any more bones if we can help it. We could meet up after school each day to work on it, Mina added. And not just for Izuku. None of us could use our quirks for 3 months, so we're all probably out of practice. Shoto nodded along. And we can make sure to keep up the skills we learned in Gravity Falls while we're at it. He wasn't too sure about the idea of using his flames in something as simple as the sports festival where there were no life and death stakes, and therefore probably no reason to risk using something that, while much better than before, could still backfire. But he definitely wanted to keep up with his martial arts training. They had promised Wendy, after all. Izuku smiled slowly. Yeah, that sounds great. We should do it. All Might's fond gaze was nothing like Endeavor's. If anything, despite how different the two men seemed to be, the way All Might looked at Izuku reminded Shoto of the way Ford looked at him. The way Stan looked at all of them. When he turned to the rest of them, his gaze was still fond, and he bowed slightly. Thank you for being such good friends to young Midoriya. It's really no problem, Ochako assured him, smiling. He makes it easy, Mina agreed. Shoto nudged Izuku slightly. If anything, we're the lucky ones. Guys? All Might laughed. We really do need to work on how much you cry though, young Midoriya. I'm glad we're all on board for training after school, Mina said, as they left the lounge and headed for the cafeteria. The mystery crew is going to take the sports festival by storm. Next to her, Izuku was still smiling. And it'll be nice to finally participate in an event that doesn't have death on the line. I mean, I've seen a lot of sports festivals, and while they were exciting and intense, it's probably going to be a safer version of Globnar, if anything. Don't say that, Ochako groaned good-naturedly. You'll jinx it, she sobered. But seriously, you said he'd passed your quirk on to you, but I didn't realize he was that injured. I hope he's going to be okay. Me too, Izuku admitted quietly. When we first met, he could stay in his hero form for 3 hours. I can't believe what happened at the USA shortened his time by half. The villains were specifically gunning for him. Even if they couldn't kill All Might, they still managed to whittle him down, Shoto said. It would make sense if All for One planned that from the beginning. Mina paused, turning to her friend. All for One? Shoto blinked. Yes, the one who gave All Might that injury. Didn't he just mention him? Now Izuku and Ochako had stopped as well, looking at Shoto with wide eyes. He definitely didn't say anything about that, Izuku said cautiously. Shoto raised a hand to his head, looking confused. But I could have sworn, I know it, but where? We believe you. Maybe it's some sort of, I don't know, weirdness knowledge, Ochako offered, voice unsure. From the portal? I didn't get anything like that from the portal, Mina pointed out. I can ask All Might about it later, Izuku suggested. Maybe he did say something, and the rest of us missed it. Somehow, Mina didn't think that was the case. Something weird was going on here. Midoriya, Uraraka, Ashido, and Todoroki. Mina found herself drawn to Ida's voice as they entered the lunchroom and saw him waving them over. Ochako beamed. Did you save us a seat? Of course. You're my friends. I was waiting for you. Mina grinned as they made their way over. She didn't really have any opinions on their class president besides that he was kind of bossy, but Ochako and Izuku spoke so highly of him, so she was excited to learn more. It might not have been the best first day back, but it definitely could have been worse. This is not a request. This is a statement. We've allowed your school many freedoms, Principal, but this is something that the commission will not budge on. Principal Nedzu, with seemingly practiced ease, showed nothing of his irritation as he faced down the Hero Public Safety Commission president. Personally, if Shouta were him, he would have snapped and yelled in the woman's face by now. Which was one of the reasons Shouta was glad it wasn't him taking point in talking to her. I can assure you, Madam President, that Yua is doing everything in our power to prevent another incident like this, Nedzu said calmly, still smiling in the face of Aoki Mai's stern look. That includes investing in and installing anti-warp technology. Akoi raised an eyebrow. Then there should be no problems. Nedzu tapped the file she'd handed him at the beginning of the meeting. We have been looking at different options and want to choose security that best protects our students. This technology that you're proposing, however, is still experimental. It's state-of-the-art. It's untested, Shouta interrupted flatly. Untested experimental technology for something as complex as anti-warp fields could result in a disaster. Next to him, Ken nodded his head, staring Aoki down with an unimpressed look. It's exactly as Eraserhead says, Nedzu agreed cheerfully. We're looking to protect our students, not put them at risk. We will be using a well-tested and regulated anti-warp field. Thank you for your time, Aoki-san. Aoki glared down at Nedzu for a long moment, before letting out a huff that sounded like surrender. Very well, but it will be used at the arena for the sports festival. You may have full control over your facilities, Principal, but the sports festival is a national hero-based event with many pro-heroes and citizens attending. Its publicity gives the Commission the right to intercede in this particular instance. Once it is proven that the technology works, I hope you will reconsider your stance. If it's well tested and proven to be safe, then of course we will take it under consideration. Nedzu's eyes glittered dangerously, despite his smile. Shouta knew that he hated the idea of letting the Commission have their way with the sports festival more than anyone else in the room, which was certainly saying something. They were also well aware, however, that the sports festival was the single UA event where the Commission could hold any sway. Shouta wasn't surprised that they'd pushed on it. The bastards were always trying to make new inroads into US business. And in this particular instance, they had enough say in the matter to pull it off. Judging by her razor-thin smile, Aoki knew it too. As soon as Aoki left, Nedzu turned to the rest of them. Power Loader, would you look into this technology that Aoki-san is going on about? It's strange that she's so insistent. Majima nodded. As soon as I get the chance, I'll start digging. Could be that it's just a useful excuse to try and gain more leverage and power over Yua, Ken pointed out. Nedzu nodded, conceding his point. There's a very good chance of that. I would like to cover all of our bases, however. Shouta had a bad feeling about this. Sensei? Kirishima raised a hand. You haven't told us why we're in the gym yet. It was true. Yesterday they'd had a study period rather than Foundation Heroics class, but today Aizawa had led them to one of the UA gyms, where All Might was waiting. It was mostly empty, but mats were spread across the floor. We'll be doing something a bit different today, All Might declared. Watching him like this, Ochako almost found it hard to believe that he was really so small and could only hold this form briefly. With most of our facilities being temporarily closed to Titan security, we will be going back to the basics, hand-to-hand combat. Excited murmurs spread around the class. Ochako caught Shouto's eye and grinned as he nodded back at her. They were planning to keep up what Wendy had taught them, of course, but Ochako had expected that they'd need to do it all on their own time. Getting to actually spar in class was surprising, but exciting. She couldn't wait to keep on improving. Hopefully, they got to choose their partners. Mina and Izuku had joined their lessons eventually and were certainly better than average, but aside from Wendy, Shoto was the only one who could give her a challenge. Now, all might put a hand in the air. I would like everyone who already has knowledge on hand-to-hand or any sort of self-defense training to put a hand in the air. Ochako raised her hand, as did the rest of the mystery crew. So did Ojiro, which Ochako had kind of suspected his hero costume looked like a martial arts outfit. After all, Ida and Yaoyorozu also put their hands in the air, as did Kirishima. Excellent. Now, we will be splitting the class up briefly. Those without any training will be working with me. We will be working on the basics, how to fall, how to safely throw a punch, and move up from there. Aizawa will be instructing those who already understand the fundamentals. Are we going to use our quirks for this? Siro asked. Like the quirk assessment test. Aizawa shook his head. Not today. This is basics only. It's illogical to work on sparring with quirks without first understanding how to spar without them. Bakugou scoffed. Seriously? We're going to fight with our quirks as heroes, so what's the point? Mina snorted out loud. Shoto turned to Bakugou with a raised eyebrow. You're asking the teacher who can erase quirks. Bakugou huffed, but didn't raise any more objections. Aizawa nodded. Right, everyone who does have experience with me. I want to see what you already know. You know self-defense, Ida? Izuku asked, as they followed their teacher. Ida nodded. Self-defense training was necessary for both my brother and I when we were kids, he explained. To make sure that if anyone tried to get to our parents through us, we could defend ourselves in time to get help. Next to him, Yaoyorozu nodded. I assume the same is true for Todoroki. Sort of. Endeavor focused a lot more on quirk training than physical combat. I've only been learning more of that recently. My quirk's already mostly good for brawling, Kirishima pointed out. It made sense for me to actually learn how to throw a punch with it. Quiet down. They all turned to Aizawa. Right. How long has each one of you been training? 7 years of karate, Ojiro said, smiling slightly. Just a few months, Ochako admitted. Shoto nodded after her. I've known the basics for years, but I only started training in earnest a few months ago. When Izuku and Mina said their own versions of the same, Ochako could see understanding pass through Aizawa's expression. Meanwhile, both Ida and Yaoyorozu had taken many self-defense classes, but not much in the way of actual martial arts, while Kirishima had about half a year of actual martial arts lessons under his belt. After that, Aizawa split them into pairs, with Ojiro and Kirishima, Ida and Yaoyorozu, Izuku and Mina, and her and Shoto. Ochako grinned and started on her stretches. When they were finally allowed to actually spar, Ochako found herself falling into their easy rhythm of back and forth, and, out of curiosity, snuck a peek at the other groups. To her slight surprise, Ojiro and Kirishima's spar looked a lot different than theirs. She could see some of the moves that Wendy taught them being used, but also some things that were very different as well. Shoto followed her gaze, before turning back to her and using the moment of distraction to try and kick her feet out from under her. We know Wendy has won tournaments, but she's also not really the type to stick to just one form of combat. Makes sense that she has her own unique stuff she taught us. Yeah, and a lot of it was also focused on incorporating weapons, and taking down targets bigger and or stronger than us. Seeing just how different it was to their classmates, however, made Ochako curious. Clearly she wasn't the only one. Ojiro and Kirishima caught up to them as they were heading back to the classroom. Have you seriously only been training for a few months? Ojiro wondered. That was really advanced, and incorporated a lot of different styles. Did you learn mixed martial arts? Sort of, Izuku admitted. We had a really good teacher, and they'd had to use their newly learned skills in plenty of life or death scenarios, but none of them felt like mentioning that. She was just, unique. That's definitely one way to describe her. Ochako laughed, then felt a pang of homesickness. She probably shouldn't, since they technically were home, but she missed Wendy. She missed everyone back in Gravity Falls. Dude, she sounds so manly. Do you think she'd be open to another student? I'd love to ask her for tips. Mina grinned awkwardly. Don't think that's really possible right now. Maybe in the future, though. She brightened. Oh, hey, maybe sometime we could all get together and trade our own tips. You guys were also really good, and it's important to fight more than a couple people so you don't fall into habit, right? I've heard that too, Ajiro agreed, looking interested. And it would definitely be good training for the sports festival. It could be a weekend thing, if you guys are free, Ochako suggested. We could invite Ida and Yayurazu too. Hell yeah, let's do it. What exactly is going on here? Mina stared at the massive crowd that had formed in front of their classroom door, preventing any sort of quick exit. Is it sports festival related, do you think? Are they all gathering around Class B as well? Kaminari, who'd heard her, shrugged haplessly. Only one way to find out. He opened the door, and immediately the gathered crowd started talking over each other. Ida made his way over to the door himself. Excuse me, what business do you have with Class A? We can't get out, Minta protested. What did you come here for anyway? They're obviously scouting out the enemy, small fry, Bakugou said, walking past him. We're the ones who made it out of the villain's attack. He stopped for a moment, eyes glancing over Izuku. Most of us, anyways. He turned to the crowd. There's no point to that. Out of my way, extras. Mina jumped forwards and shoved Bakugou's face away with a smile, ignoring his startled yell. Sorry about him. Hello, everyone. Please stop crowding the door so we can leave. You guys can't really control him that well, can you? Mina searched the gathering of people for the voice and found a Gen Ed student with messy purple hair and designer eye bags making his way towards them. I came to see what class it was like, but you all seem pretty arrogant. It almost makes me disillusioned. It's pretty arrogant of you to judge all of us by just one classmate, Mina fired back, still smiling. It's that so? There was something calculating in the other's tired gaze as he looked at her. You were one of the kidnapped students, right? You know, depending on the results of the sports festival, UA will consider transferring promising Gen Ed students into the hero course. He smirked slightly. As well as transferring hero students out. Getting kidnapped by villains just as school starts is already pretty damaging to your reputation, I'd imagine. You should be careful, your spot might get swept out from under you if you keep going like this. He looked into their classroom, and his gaze caught on Shadow. Even if you're some special recommended student, although, I suppose you must not really be all that. Having a famous father must really make things easy for you, huh? Oh, now Mina was getting properly angry. Implying that their kidnapping was because they weren't good at being heroes was one very obviously untrue thing, considering all they'd done in Gravity Falls. Insulting Shadow and bringing up his dad was another. How dare he? You know, Mina said, her grin much sharper now. If you're going to try for the heroics course, you might want to cut down on statements like that. Victim blaming and insulting your possible future classmates is pretty far from heroic, I'd say. We all earned our spots here, even Shadow and Yayurazu. Even those of us who were scattered across the world by a warp quirk. You want to transfer in? Start putting your money where your mouth is. Now the crowd was much more focused on her, rather than Bakugou or the Gen Ed kid. Shadow walked up behind her, giving her a small, grateful smile, before turning to the crowd himself. Please move. Some of us have trains to catch. Hey, a boy with gray hair and strange markings around his eyes called out. I'm from Class B next door. I came to hear about your villain fight. Don't get so full of yourselves. If you bark too much, it'll be embarrassing for you during the real fight. We're not barking, Izuku pointed out. We just want to leave the classroom. Indeed, Ida got in front of them all and waved his hands around, forcing the other students to back up a bit. As Class A's representative, what you're doing now is most disgraceful. If you wish to speak to us about the villain fight, do so without insulting our classmates and declaring war on us. With that, finally the crowd dispersed enough so that they could slip through. They finally made it out on the other side of the swarming mass of students, and Mina breathed a sigh of relief. What a jerk. I guess Bakugou's not the only piece of work at this school. She turned to Shadow. Are you okay? Shadow nodded. I'm fine, but thanks. We all know he's talking about things he doesn't understand. We'll show them all at the sports festival, Ochako agreed, face pinched with determination. If they think they can underestimate us because we got sent to Gravity Falls, then we should show them exactly what we got from being there. And definitely work on training our quirks, Izuku added, so we can make the best impression possible. It felt like forever since they'd been back at the USG, with reconstruction and the new security measures fully installed, as the rescue training grounds had been the first place to receive the new upgrades. Hero students were allowed to visit after school to train their quirks for the sports festival. This was where the mystery crew gathered now, inside the collapsed zone, currently taking a small break from training to drink water and discuss what they needed to work on. You know, it's kind of funny, Mina mused, sipping from her water bottle. Obviously, super strength and acid are two very different things, so all the work I've done on improving my strength hasn't helped much at all with my acid. But what has helped is my grappling hook and gun. I'm so much more accurate with it than I was before Gravity Falls, and I think that's why. My power hasn't helped much with my quirk either, Ochako admitted, lifting one of the rocks up with her power rather than with her quirk. You'd think they'd be really similar, right? But I guess that they're just different enough that they don't interact much. At most, erasing the gravity of objects makes them easier to lift with telekinesis, but I can already lift so much with my power that it's not very noticeable. Same here. Shadow lit a small fire in his left hand, which burned orange rather than the blue Izuku was used to seeing from him. He'd mostly been working on control with it today. It seemed like despite the 3.5 months of disuse, he still had amazing control over the ice half of his quirk, so now he was working on improving the fire half, which currently meant figuring out how to best control it in non-lethal ways. Could it be because your flames still don't always do what you want that your fire is harder to control? Izuku suggested. Shadow shook his head. It's hard to explain, and I didn't really notice until I actually started using my quirk fire, but they're two very different things. My quirk is heat, essentially. I can heat things up and produce flames, even on a massive scale. But it's just heat and fire, with my flames. He trailed off, then flicked his right hand, and it lit up with his flames, while his left hand was still on fire. With the two side by side, Izuku could see the difference in a way he never would have noticed before Shadow got his quirk back. Something about the way they moved, the actual flames themselves. They look different, Ochako voiced Izuku's thoughts. Yeah. Shadow extinguished both flames. Like I said, my quirk lets me produce heat and fire. My flames, they're different. Sure, they can set things on fire, but that's more like one possible result that can happen rather than their actual purpose. It's more like an energy, I guess, that just happens to take the form of flames when physical. I don't think I can explain it more than that. That's just how it feels. Hey, you'd know best. If you say that's how it is, we believe you, Mina assured him. And Izuku? What about one for all? Izuku winced. Well, I'm still trying to figure that out. It still seems like I can only use it at 100% or nothing. But I'd like to give it another shot. Ochako nodded, and sent another massive rock flying up in the air above them. Izuku channeled one for all into his flicking fingers and aimed. Think of the microwave. Don't overcook the egg. You can do this. He flicked, and immediately cried out as his bones shattered, and the rock was blown to smithereens. The others immediately ran over, but his regeneration was already working, fire covering his fingers and healing them. That's new, he muttered, as emerald green flames fixed his fingers, healing him even faster than normal. They looked like regular flames before. Mina stared wide-eyed at his fingers. What happened? Our quirks didn't combine with our powers. Shadow hummed thoughtfully. Izuku, how did All Might describe one for all specifically? Well, he called it the crystallization of power, I think. Power being stockpiled, and then passed from one person to the next. Izuku looked at his hands again, and then back up at Shadow as he caught on to what the other boy was implying. You don't think? Shadow nodded. If it's the crystallization of power, not just of quirks, then maybe it's incorporating your regeneration power. That's just a theory, though. How would that work? Ochako wondered. It's only stockpiled quirks before, right? Sure, but it's only been passed on to people with quirks, not someone with anything else, Izuku pointed out, excitement bubbling up. I mean, it's already a pretty strange power anyways, because no other quirk can be passed on. So maybe it's just interacting with my supernatural power in the same way that it would if I had another quirk. That would be so cool. It still doesn't help you with not breaking your fingers in the first place, though, Ochako said. I mean, they just got pretty broken. And even if you can heal them immediately, that's still not good. Maybe it has to do with how you're using it. Mina sat down on one of the nearby railing and rested her head on one of her hands thoughtfully. I mean, what's different about how you use one for all than how All Might uses it? He said it was all about feeling, Izuku explained. That you start off only able to use all or nothing, but eventually get a feel for how to moderate the amount of power being used. But every time I turn it on, it seems like I can only turn it on at 100%. Maybe it's your thinking that's the problem, Shoto suggested. If you're thinking of one for all like a light switch, then it's either on or off, so it's all or nothing. Maybe your quirk is different, but that's not how half cold, half hot works. It's always there, even when I'm not using it. It's definitely not like a switch. Oh yeah, zero gravity is like that too, Ochako agreed. I mean, I need to touch something with all 5 fingers to make it float, but there's no on or off button. Even when I'm not touching or floating things, I still have my quirk. Plus, you're always using it in one specific place, Mina added. I mean, Ochako's quirk only works with all 5 fingers, but it's not like she just switches on her fingers or anything. So, I should have one for all on all the time, Izuku mused, and spread out evenly everywhere? Would that fix things? He mused on this for a moment. It clicked. I've been treating one for all as a quirk like it's some special move, Izuku realized. You're right, I need to think of it more evenly. So instead of using it all full power in only parts of my body, I could try using a lower percentage, maybe only 5%, everywhere and all the time. Try it, Mina encouraged. Izuku nodded and activated one for all, first in his feet, then spreading upwards. Imagine the heat that was only in one place spreading throughout my entire body. Everywhere, but on a lower gear everywhere. One for all was everywhere, and then it all clicked into place, as naturally as blinking, the glowing light of the quirk transforming into sparks of lightning, the same emerald green color as his healing flames had become. Sparks of lightning. Sparks. Shoto seemed to make the connection as well. I guess we finally understand what your symbol meant. We should tell Ford when we see him next. He'd probably want to know. Agreed. Deku, you look so cool, Ochako beamed at him. Want to try it out? Izuku beamed back. Yes. By the time Shoto returned home, he was absolutely exhausted, but equally content. Izuku finally figuring out how to not break his bones while using his quirk was a load off now. He didn't need to worry about his friend injuring himself again and again. At this point, food and then falling asleep sounded perfect. Shoto headed towards the kitchen. Shoto, it's time to do some training. Shoto paused, then turned back towards his father. I've been training for hours already, both during and after school. Rest is important too, you know. Endeavor was unmoved. You think villains will let you rest just because you're tired? Don't be ridiculous, boy. And after your poor performance at the USJ getting taken so easily, it's become clear to me that I've been too lenient. That changes now. Really, Shoto should have expected this. For a long, tempting moment, he contemplated ignoring his father, turning back around and heading into the kitchen. But he knew Endeavor would just get angrier, smack him around, and drag him to the training room himself. There was no point in stalling. Stan and Ford never treated me this way. It really was funny how he could be standing in the home he'd always lived in, and yet be desperately homesick for the shack. He sighed, still unwilling to completely submit. Let's just get this over with, then. His father scowled at his attitude, and Shoto internally counted that as a win. The training room was the same as ever. Endeavor was the same as ever, insisting on pushing him further and further past his body's limits in order to break him and then make him stronger. But Shoto was different. Now, when his father came at him, he could dodge his physical attacks more easily. After all, part of Wendy's training dealt with using his opponent's size against him. and then, unthinking, he used the fire side of his quirk to block Endeavor's own flames. His father paused for a moment, wide-eyed, before breaking out into a grin. "I guess your stupidity had some positive consequences. So you've finally gotten over your little rebellion and are ready to really start training as my masterpiece. Excellent." "Not really," Shadow admitted, before he could help himself. It hadn't even occurred to him what his father might think about him finally using the other half of his quirk. "I just decided that it doesn't matter if they come from you or not. They're not your flames, after all. They have nothing to do with you. And if he could use the fire he got from Cipher, then he could stomach using the fire he got from Endeavor." His father's face contorted angrily, and his blows grew even stronger. "You know," Shadow found himself saying, as he blocked another of his father's attacks, "it was probably a bad idea to never train me in physical combat. Sure, I can use my quirk well, but if I hadn't learned hand-to-hand by myself, that would have been a major weakness. That's a pretty big oversight." The surprised and indignant anger on his father's face was, frankly, hilarious, and the way he looked so stupid, blustering about and continuing to try and hurt his masterpiece for the crime of pointing out his mistakes, was funny enough that Shadow had to choke down his laughter. And for all his talk, Endeavor knew nothing about what he could do now. Shadow could use his flames, not the kind he got from Endeavor, but the kind he got from Bill, and turn Endeavor into a bunch of butterflies, right here and now. In fact, the look on his old man's face would be so priceless that Shadow flicked a hand to summon his flames. That would kill him. He was about to kill his father. The flames died out. Endeavor's next punch hit him in the face, and Shadow didn't even bother to block, stomach churning with horror. All the fight drained out of him, and he just let the blows come, mind detaching completely from the experience. He'd actually summoned his flames. He'd been ready to use them on another human, in a way that could kill them. And that human was his own father. Something was wrong with him. Ever since they'd gotten back, maybe even before, he could remember having a few scattered thoughts like this after Weird Mageddon, but they weren't as strong. Something was wrong. He felt disconnected from his body, like the flesh experiencing the pain wasn't really his. Though wasn't completely unfamiliar, he was pretty sure he'd disassociated before. But this felt so much more visceral and strange than the other times it had happened. "Back up your boasting," Endeavor was saying. "Clearly you can make blue flames, but you're hesitating to use them. We'll be correcting that as well." He didn't notice how different they were from his normal fire. Everything slipped out of focus again. When Shadow finally came back to himself, he was still in the training room, but his father was gone. Instead, Fayumi was there, icing and dressing his wounds. She must have noticed more movement from him, because her eyes met his and lit up. "Shadow, oh thank God, you're back." Shadow nodded distantly. "How long was I?" "Just a few minutes," Fayumi assured him. "Father just walked out. Does ice on the chest still help with grounding for you?" "Yeah." Fayumi took that as permission to hold some ice up to the left side of his chest, and Shadow let out a deep breath. Fayumi. He'd almost killed Endeavor, and it had been so causal, and he hadn't even thought about it. Shadow felt nauseous, felt entirely off-kilter. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong, and he knew it, but he couldn't figure out what. He needed to get out, away from this massive sterile house with no life. He missed the shack, he missed feeling safe, he missed his friends and Stan and Ford. "What do you need?" Fayumi asked gently. Shadow scrambled for an answer, and pink flashed through his mind. "Mina, my friend. I want to see my friends. I want to get out of this house. I don't want to be here tonight. I think if I stay I'll do something I regret." "Then let's call your friend and see if you can stay over there tonight," Fayumi agreed softly. Shadow eyed her warily. "What about you though? If he finds out—" "I'll be fine," Fayumi promised, smiling at him. Except there was something different about her smile, something that had changed since before he got sent to Gravity Falls, and he'd thought that he'd picked up on something when he first saw her, but now certainty was pooling in his gut, and he knew. "He hit you while I was gone." Fayumi winced. Equal parts rage and horror pooled in Shadow's gut. Not the unfamiliar kind that he'd been experiencing lately, but the kind that had made him decide he wouldn't use his fire in the first place, emotions that had been with him for a decade now. Father hit Fayumi. He'd never hit Fayumi before, just ignored her and Natsuo. But something had changed, and he'd hurt Shadow's sister like he'd always hurt Shadow. And Shadow wasn't there to help, like Fayumi had always helped him. It's because I was gone, he realized. I was gone, and father was angry, and he took it out on you because you were the only one left to take it out on. Shadow. Fayumi grabbed his hands and squeezed them firmly. Don't do that. It's not your fault. Father's actions are his own. Him hurting you is his fault, not yours, and the same goes for me. It's not your fault. Shadow knew that. On some level, he was very aware of that. But Endeavor had never hit Fayumi before. He'd been so worried about her, but he hadn't thought their father would physically harm her. I'll be okay, Fayumi promised again. Do you have Mina's number? Let's call her. Shadow looked at her skeptically, but Fayumi just smiled at him. Hesitantly, he nodded. She helped him to his feet, and they found his phone, where the others had entered in their numbers just a few days ago, now that they actually had phones again to call each other with. He found Mina's contact and pressed call. She answered immediately. Hey Shu, what's up? Shadow swallowed. Tried again. It's been a bad night. Is there any chance? You should come over, Mina agreed immediately. Someone else yelled in the background, and Shadow stiffed. His friend's voice became softer as she addressed whoever had yelled. No Mom, it's Shadow. No, it's not like that. He's a friend. Mom. No, he needs. Mom, just listen to me please. Whoever was yelling, Mina's mother, apparently, wasn't having any of it. Shadow didn't think he could feel any worse right now, but apparently he was wrong. If Mina had been dealing with her own rough home life the entire time and he hadn't known. Sorry about that, Mina finally said, speaking to him again, tone exhausted. Moms got opinions on who it's okay to invite over, and apparently that excludes all boys. The only reason she allowed me to go to that sleepover was because Ochako was also there. It's not like your dad. She's pretty great most of the time, and I know I shouldn't complain. She and Dad are just. It's okay, Shadow assured her. You're allowed to be upset at them with me. It's not a competition. I know, but I still feel bad. She was silent for a moment. We should go to Izuku's place. Inko was happy to have us last time, and she did figure out that something was up with your dad. I'm sure she'd be fine with it. If you're sure. I am. I'll text Izuku. Actually, I'll text Ochako too, since we should leave her out. We can head over together. Where do you want to meet? Shadow considered this. There was that sushi place that seemed like a good middle point between our houses. We can meet there. Right, then I'll see you soon, she paused. Do you want to stay on the phone? Shadow smiled, even though she couldn't see him. No, it's okay. I'll see you soon. After he hung up, he turned to Fayumi one last time. Are you sure about this? I am, Fayumi insisted. Come on. I'll help you pack some stuff. Inko's eyes widened as she opened the door and took in Shadow's face, before she put on a smile. I'm glad you made it. Both of you, come in. Ochako is already here. Sorry for intruding, Shadow murmured as they stepped inside. There's nothing to be sorry for, Inko insisted, and he could feel her concerned gaze on his back. You're always welcome here, understand? Whenever you need, just call. My door is always open. Thanks. Izuku really did have a fantastic mother, to the point where Shadow kept feeling surprised every time they talked. Mina squeezed his arm gently. Want to go hang out with the others? Yeah. Izuku and Ochako were already in Izuku's room. Both of them gasped as they took in his face. Shadow Izuku trailed off. Shadow sat down on the bed, and Mina sat cross-legged next to him. Endeavor wanted to do more training. I'm so much better than I was, but also, something's wrong. That wrong feeling, it keeps happening, and it feels like it's getting worse. I almost used Cipher's flames on him, like I did with that car and the Cthulhu monster. He was hurting you, Ochako pointed out softly. Yes, but that's no excuse. Even if I hate him, I'd never do that to a living person, much less my father. Shadow rubbed his forehead. Everything's been so weird and off, and I can't explain it, and it doesn't make sense. He swallowed. And it turns out he hurt Fayumi while I was gone, and I don't know what to do. Mina's eyes were watery. Can I hug you? Shadow nodded, and she pulled him in. I don't know what we can do either, she admitted. But we'll figure it out. You're not alone, Shoto. Mina's right, Izuku agreed. We'll figure something out. I'm not sure what, but we will. And maybe when Ford reopens the portal, he can help us figure out what's going on with all the weird thoughts and weirdness knowledge stuff. Shoto hoped so. After the mess that was the end of the day, Shoto had at least hoped that he'd be tired enough that he wouldn't dream. No such luck. They weren't even dreams, exactly more like weird glimpses of places, things, memories, something. There were dozens that flashed by, but only a few stood out. Are you sure this is the right shape? Up the dosage. It's best if you stop struggling, Shirakumo. This wasn't what I wanted. I never asked for this. Do you mind if I scan this for a sec? I'll give it right back. Shut up, you crazy bastards. Not yet. We'll move when all 10 of us are here. What's happening to me? Nov ilrofer adekni same tuino ht follow ositni tuif listed liuberl liwidi lanoser paimiet kovniel tal oxa. Stanley. He watched as Stan pulled his arm back, about to punch. Not him. This wasn't him. This wasn't his memory. None of these were his memories. Some of them were seemingly random events, but this one, and most of them, were from the perspective of... Shoto jerked awake with a gasp, breathing heavily. No, non. Shoto, he could hear the others waking up, could see Mina rubbing her eyes in the corner of his vision. Bill Cipher, he managed. They're Cipher's thoughts and memories. I'm seeing Cipher's thoughts and memories. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 9. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author jkawsome on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.